Zach, when did you start writing screenplays?
I started in NYU Film School, so a while ago. But it was actually, I wrote my first, it wasn't, I was writing short scripts in film school, and then my first script I wrote right after I graduated.
And that was part of your thesis, was to do these shorts? Or?
No, so we were more, I wasn't in the dramatic writing program at NYU. We were in the film production, TV production major, so to speak. We focused more on producing, directing. We did obviously take a writing class or two, but that was more sort of geared towards short films that we would shoot ourselves or produce, or at that time video. You know, we had the TV production. But for the most part, no, I didn't. I had always been curious about writing, but I really, and once I got out of film school and through film school, I really developed a affinity for writing and editing. And you was sort of the beginning of the process and the end of the process. But I always thought the most creative parts of the process of making films or making television. So, you know, again, it was mostly short stuff through film school. But then when I got out, I started thinking, all right, let me give this writing thing a go. And I wrote my first script. I think I had started on it maybe during film school, but then once I was out, right when I had finished, after graduation, I finished it.
And after graduation, did you stay in New York City?
For about a year. I worked some odd jobs, and you know, I had my family was there, and I had a girlfriend at the time who I was very serious with. And once I sort of realized that New York wasn't the place to be, and that, you know, I had spoken to some friends of mine and fellow Tisch alum who were out on the West Coast, you know, it became clear that I needed to move out here to LA and start my film career. This is where everyone and everything was at the time. It's since changed a lot and evolved, but back then that's when it became clear that, you know, New York really wasn't happening on the grand scale that, you know, or to further my career at the time in the film and TV business. So I moved.
And when you came here, did you have any sort of, not buyer's remorse, but did you have a couple sleepless nights where you said, maybe this isn't for me?
You know, I don't remember. I think, you know, I was very fortunate because both my parents were very supportive in my decision. You know, they had both been advertising executives and both kind of always marched to their own beat. So they wanted, you know, they wanted me to sort of pursue my goals, career goals. And so moving here, I definitely felt that I had their support. I've missed them very much. But no, I don't think I ever had any sleepless nights. At times I thought, oh, maybe I will move back one day because I did miss New York. But after a while, I just became accustomed to LA and realized that I was more probably, while New York was always home, I always felt that, you know, my soul belonged here in California and Los Angeles.
How many screenplays did you write before you wrote Take Back?
Well, I wrote Take Back probably in the year 2012. So before that, I had written probably about 10, I'd say anywhere from 8 to 10 off the top of my head. So yeah, it was interesting story. It was my manager at the time suggested I write something, a low budget action film. And I, believe it or not, was in church. I attended this church service once, and this woman was speaking about, she ran this worldwide organization that helped women and helped them recover and, you know, build their lives back. And I just remember I literally had the conversation with my manager, like suggesting I write a low budget action film. And this, you know, sermon, you know, literally a week later, I'm like, oh, that's interesting. And it kind of went from there. But yeah, it was a, I would say probably a good 8 to 10 scripts before I wrote Take Back.
And these were feature scripts?
Yeah, they were feature. I had written some. I hadn't quite started doing pilots. I had written. I subsequently wrote some pilots, but this was my first. This was. Everything else had been features up until that point. Yeah.
And so were you using a screenwriting software when you started these 8 to 10 scripts, or were you doing it just sort of like in a Word document, pages?
No, I always used Final Draft. I think back in film school and maybe my first script, I used what was called, I think it was called Script Thing. It was an NYU professor of mine. He had it was Final Draft. I think was around at the time. I'm pretty sure, but he had us using Script Thing, and it was fine. It was just like Final Draft, but and I don't even know if it's still around. I'm assuming it's not. But after that, I went to Final Draft. But I always plot my story on Word doc. I always structure, plan everything on my Word doc before I go into the actual writing of the script, and that could take months before I feel comfortable with that blueprint before I put it before I go and start actually writing action and dialogue.
Was Take Back your original script?
Yes, Take Back was an original script. And again, it was, I should say, inspired by this story. And I'll give you the story that I heard was this woman who ran this worldwide organization that helped girls. She had heard about this, or had taken in this young woman who I think was about maybe 18 or 19 at the time, and she was dating this guy. And she was dating this man for a few months, and one night he took her to like this bar, and she was subsequently drugged, and this was in St. Louis, and she woke up in this just sort of very decrepit, abandoned warehouse somewhere with other girls, and was basically kept there for I think 3 to 4 years. Yeah, and it was this horrific story where she was kept there, and as miracle would have it, one day her captor, or one of her captors, I guess, left the key near her, because she was basically chained to a bed 3 or 4 years, and Johns would come in and, do their thing. And she was chained to this bed, and miraculously, this key dropped. I guess one of the captors' key to her cuffs dropped on the bed or near the bed. She got it, freed herself, and escaped and alerted the cops. And so that was really that was the story that sort of drove me to, write the script. Like, if there was this woman who was taken, held, and then basically she wound up escaping and taking revenge on her, trying to live a normal life. Her past came back to haunt her in the form of the man who kidnapped her, who she thought was dead. And then, she's got to basically, now she has this family that she has to protect. So that was sort of the bare bones for the story that I came up with. And, again, subsequently went through a number of drafts till it got to the shooting version.
Does your process change every time you write a screenplay? Or has it evolved, or sometimes you'll do it one way and you'll plot and you'll outline, and other times you'll start another way?
Great question, and I know everyone has a different process about when you're developing a script or an idea. For me, I feel like I've gotten that old adage of, work smarter, not harder. I think that ultimately boils down to having a really solid, the first process is getting the log line down, where you have the log line and you have that hint of irony. It's just, boiling it down to a sentence that you can pitch to somebody. Like, what's it about? And, people get it right away. From there, once I think you have that locked in, then it's a matter of really breaking it out into, the main components of the story and the structure. For me, that is where I've really become a lot more fastidious with my process of, knowing, like, again, what's the hard turn? What's that inciting incident? How does it affect the character? what's sending them off to that first act turning point. Then from there to the midpoint, and then into Act 3 and how they're changing along the way. I think it was, I'm sure like every other writer, obviously read the Blake Snyder, Save the Cat. And I think, honestly, that's probably the most comprehensive book on screenwriting. I recommend that anyone who's looking to break in, I always tell them to get, Save the Cat. Save the Cat goes to the movies, because I think Blake Snyder was really onto something. So I really do follow, I believe it's the 16 major beats that he laid out in there, and their purpose. And for me, that really, I think, I was going in that direction before I read the Blake Snyder novel, but certainly after. And he was also such an inspiring writer, Blake Snyder was. But getting a good idea of, how to, really lay out the story and how to structure it, that to me is the most important part of the process. I think once you have your log line and your structure, the writing, it's probably about 60-70% of the process. I think the actual writing is about 30%, because if you have everything lined up, where your character's going, their journey, it's going to make things a lot easier for you. And of course, things will always change, and you have to be open and flexible. I know some people who write 30-page outlines, 40-page outlines. I usually try to keep it between 6 and 8 pages, just because I feel like if you're with an outline like that, you sort of lose some of the momentum and the creativity, where if you have a good idea and you really have a good structure in place, knowing, what scene comes after what scene comes after what scene, and it's this, snowball that keeps rolling up. If you keep it tight in that outline, and then from there you can use that and then just transfer it to the final draft or the actual script. I think then you have good momentum to keep the creative flow going, for sure, and leaving yourself room for some flexibility, because things will always come up, and certainly has in anything that I've ever written.
And how long did you work on the log line for Take Back?
The log line. That one actually came fairly quickly. I don't recall, because it's been some time, but I think after really sort of attending that particular church service, it came pretty quickly. And, again, I pitched it to my manager at the time and gave him a very bare bones idea of where I wanted the story to go. And he said, yeah, go for it. He was always he still is my barometer, and we still throw ideas off, the wall at each other, and I think he definitely was instrumental in, giving me, a good good feedback on the log line and then where the story was going to go.
Do you remember the exact log line?
The exact. Well, I remember the quick elevator pitch was always going to be Taken. It was going to be Taken meets A History of Violence. I always loved A History of Violence for. I just thought it was based on a graphic novel, but I loved, the idea of this guy who is, he's living this very seemingly quiet life in the middle of America, and he commits this act of heroism. And then his past comes back to get him, and we're still not sure, is it really him? And then, I don't know if anyone has seen it, I don't want to spoil the movie, but it really was, for me, I basically saw it as to be as simplistic as possible, a female version of A History of Violence. So it was, I guess at the time, again, this is going back a few years, the original logline would have been something like, a young woman living a seemingly, happy existence in this small town, commits act of heroism that brings evil forces from her past life, if you will.
Will you ever write a screenplay without outlining first?
No. I know, and again, my process is, I have my process. It's. A lot of people have their way of doing things. Some people can I've known writers who've been successful who are just able to, they have it in their head and they're just able to, put it down on paper, go right to final draft and put it on paper. Now, for me, I have to be, again, I really have to know how those beats turn, the main beats turn in a story, and really what my character's journey is, and where they start and where they end. And I know it seems pretty rudimentary, but it's really, for me, yeah, I don't think I could ever do that. I would be lost, there's, as I'm sure a lot of your viewers know, you've heard of second act hell, where you could write a great first act, but then just your character gets completely lost in the second act, and that morass that when you haven't plotted out. And this just applies to me, knowing really where they're supposed to go. You have to be their guide. You have to be the character's guide. And if you don't have, again, like some kind of blueprint in place, it's not going to, again, this is in my opinion, it doesn't help me. Again, there's, as I said earlier, I always find I try to be as flexible as possible with a story, especially after you've written it and you get feedback from, colleagues, and others. And sometimes a script may just not work, and you may write it and you think, this isn't cutting it. I have to go back and, re-examine and maybe rip it apart and try it again. And sometimes you just have to move on. It may just not be the right time. You may get inspired by another idea. But yeah, I would never not outline any kind of writing I do. I always have to have a blueprint in place.
Is discipline and order something that you actually enjoy?
Yes. I try to write anywhere between 4 and 6 hours a day. I think after, sometimes longer, it depends. I can go, 8 to 10 hours before I start really. I think 6 hours is pretty much is my average, where I can just, I can go to before I start. I'm like, I think my brain needs to just throw in the towel for the day. But yes, no, I'm usually up pretty early. Usually writing, I'd say anywhere between 7 and 8, and then I'll work till the late morning, take a break, do a little exercise, have breakfast, and then work again until the early evening. And that's generally my structure. And I've abided by that for a while.
I know you talked about martial arts earlier,
Yes.
And that's something that's part of your life.
Yeah, I know. Martial arts is a big part of my life, and I've been training for over 10 years, and this sort of ties into everyone's process is different. There was always this, not so much in our community, but in other, I've heard of other people who train in martial arts saying one might be better than the other, and if you're doing some martial art, it's great, because I feel like they're so wonderful for the mental, physical, and spiritual side of someone, to help them. As it is with writing, everyone has their own process, and whatever it might be, however you do something, or however you feel is, and if that works for you, then God bless. But yeah, and again, as far as martial arts, yes, I think martial arts is wonderful for discipline, for self-esteem, and you're also really, I think, tapping into similar emotions sometimes as you are with writing. There is definitely a spiritual side, I think, to martial arts, and I think as it is with writing, you're getting in touch with certain emotions in a spiritual sense, creative sense, and if that makes any sense. But yeah, I feel that in a lot of ways they run, and there's a parallel to both of them for sure. One helps the other.
Right. Speaking of spiritual, I think the writer of The Exorcist, and forgive me, I'm blanking on his name, and I enjoyed
Was it William Peter Blatty?
Yes, I think so.
Yeah.
Blatty, right. And he said there's a rhythm.
Or was that the writer of Jaws? I'm not sure. I don't
You know,
know. I read The Exorcist and I read Jaws. You know,
Oh,
when
okay,
the books.
okay,
I
right.
think it was William Peter Blatty who wrote The Exorcist.
I thought so, yeah.
Yeah.
And he said, and he was a very spiritual man, and
Yeah.
he said that there was a good writing has a rhythm.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if there's almost a correlation between that and then the martial arts, because you're getting into some sort of a flow. And
Absolutely. You know, for me, you know, aside from the joy that I get from my wife and my my daughter and my stepchildren, there are and family, and when New York sports teams are actually good, there's definitely a high I get from writing. When you're invested in a character and you're really pushing their story and you're locked in and your character almost is speaking for you. And I've heard a lot of other writers talk about that. And I think early in my career, I'm like, you know, what are you talking about? But I think after you've done it for a while and you, again, have a good sense of where, again, you have a good structure in place and you know where your story is going, the characters in a sense will start talking for you. You know where they know. You stop leading them and they start leading you in a way, which is pretty neat. And I think that is what we hope to achieve. In martial arts, absolutely. There are breakthroughs when you're in Tung Sudo, which is my martial art. We have, we perform yungs, which are essentially, you know, improvised fighting forms. And there's something to be said when you really reach that level, when you're really connected, when your mind, body, and spirit are all connected. It's that rush of euphoria that you've really, and it is a blend of creativity and it's a blend of discipline. It's a blend of focus that all comes together, and you really derive a triumphant feeling from it. There's no doubt, and you know, I know that, you know, again, if I leave the office and I'm really thrilled with something I wrote, I have a bounce in my step, similar to martial arts, if I really feel like I got a form down well. And then, of course, there are the days where you're like, ugh, you know, I wasn't really on it, you know. And I'm one to beat myself up, although I've gotten better, thanks to martial arts, about not beating myself up as much as I used to. But there's definitely links. Sure. And again, in my opinion, between the two. And I've been doing both for a long time.
we were joking off camera while setting up that you don't have to be the writer that has like several scotches and is chain smoking. And, you know, right. You can be the disciplined writer that's, like you said, up at 5 and having whatever, chai or... You know.
Yeah, no, it's funny. That story, it was that story derived from a fact that my late dad, it was actually, we were having this discussion shortly before he passed away. I told him that I was going out with some friends to, we were going to have some scotch and smoke some cigars, which was a mistake because my dad, my dad said, oh God, he said, I could just see you in your apartment there writing, with a bottle of scotch and cigar going all night. And that, to me, I'm not a big drinker. I rarely smoke cigars. But that's sort of the, I guess almost like a parody of writers from the, or stigma of writers maybe that still exists. Like my dad was probably old-fashioned in some ways. But those writers from that bygone era of the golden era of film, as they said, 30s, 40s, 50s, up in their little, I guess, what were they, bungalows, writing until all odd hours of the night, drinking scotch, smoking cigarettes or cigars. But no, my process is, 2 cups of coffee and, through the day and I'm good. No alcohol infusion or cigarettes or cigars. So yeah.
What's your typical writing day? Usually
I tend to get up anywhere between, maybe 5:45, 6:30. Again, I try not to wake my wife. and I get that cup of coffee to get my fix, my caffeine fix, and then I'm usually writing in we have a small guest house. I'm usually in the back there. For me, I enjoy reading the newspaper in the morning for about 30 minutes just to get my brain sort of drinking coffee, getting my brain going. I'm an avid reader, I always have been. And I feel like reading really starts, stimulating the mind along with the caffeine. But it gets me going. So, I try to be working by about 7:30 or 8 o'clock. And again, till, I'll work till the late morning, take a break just to get my head right, and then come back and, probably the early afternoon, and, I can go till late afternoon sometimes. So that's usually my routine. As you said, asked before, is that there's a rhythm to the rhythm. I feel, especially when I'm writing and creating.
And when you say you're reading the paper, is this an actual newspaper?
Yes, I know. I have friends, and my wife still joke me. I do have some traditions that I have not parted ways with, and yes, it is a actual paper newspaper. I really try to avoid the screen as much as I can, because I'm on it all day. So yeah, when I can usually get anything in print, it makes, just to start my day, to get those juices flowing, get my brain working. I find that reading really helps the writing, for sure. And again, doing it not on a screen.
And are you reading the first pages of the?
Yeah, it's usually I'm a longtime Wall Street Journal fan, and I happen to read pretty much everything throughout. I'm a fan of their reportage. I think it's pretty much down the middle. I know, not to get into we're a very divided country right now, but I happen to really appreciate the fact that they're fairly down the middle and not too biased one way or the other. And for me, that's important. So yeah, I mean, knowing what's going on in the world and in our country, again, has really helps me, and I think helps my writing, because you never know where that next idea is coming from. I think a lot of my ideas over the years have come from magazines or articles in the paper, not necessarily Wall Street Journal. I used to read news magazines. I wrote a script about a militia group that was derived from I believe it was a Newsweek article. In the chiropractor at the time, her office, she had this Newsweek article on the rise of militias. Probably this was around 2010 or so. So I wrote another script about a pirate hunter in the Southeast Asia, which was based on a Smithsonian article. So I always find, and I had another idea for a script that was based on a story recently in the Wall Street Journal. So that's where I derive a lot of my ideas from when I'm writing for my film ideas anyway. And then of course, Take Back was hearing something in a sermon, but it was it's a news related type story. So I always found that finding stories in the news, again, I've known people that have just been able to conjure up great stories in their mind. And I've done that a couple times, but I feel like for me, just reading about someone, and again, this is not, stealing the article or anything. It's just coming up like, oh, that's an interesting topic, and then, sort of making it my own. It wasn't never necessarily articles about a particular person. It was about a particular subject, and that definitely helped me, develop my own stories and give me that sort of that germ of the idea to then take it in the direction I wanted to and make it my own.
Who do you model your screenwriting after?
I don't model it after anyone per se. I definitely have some people of influence who I think are phenomenal writers, and obviously their track record speaks for themselves. But I've always been, obviously William Goldman, who he's the godfather of screenwriting. Tony Gilroy, Brian Helgeland, David Koepp, those guys, when you read one of their scripts, I mean, they're just on a whole other level. And, I was always especially, I would say Tony Gilroy especially, because I feel like he writes some just brilliant action. And those screenwriters, I think, for me, were definitely left an impression, and how to write just an entertaining script. Because I think sometimes the way I try to write is that I want people to keep turning the pages. I know this might be the process for many writers or what they set out to do, but I really do think it's important. It is, after all, you want your audience to keep going. And I've always believed in just being as sparse and concise as possible in my descriptions, and letting the dialogue move the story along, and not getting so wrapped up in smart ass dialogue, but just letting the characters again take the story in a direction and drive the story, especially if you're writing action or adventure or thriller type genre films.
Do you ever subscribe to the idea, I know some people have said don't delve too much into one artist's work, because then you might end up emulating them too much, and you wouldn't even realize it, or no?
There is definitely some truth to that. Reading a whole array of scripts and writers definitely helps inform you better. I feel like for some of the scripts that I wrote, I always, again, if somebody's to write an action script and they want somebody to just sort of to be a guide to somebody, a reference for them, I would always say look at a Gilroy, a Helgeland, or a David Koepp script, because again, I feel like they're, I should say that for me, pacing's really important. I want to keep the story moving along at a fluid pace, and I feel like those guys, like another Steve Zalian. Steve Zalian, I remember, said something that has left a lasting impression. I read this years ago, where he said, I will cut and cut and cut until if I cut one, again, I'm paraphrasing here, I cut one word, the whole scene falls apart. So just being able to really make your scenes as lean as possible, and in your writing, and to keep it paced, and to keep it moving forward, and keep the story moving forward, the character moving forward. And I do think, yes, it's good. I mean, read all of Tony Gilroy's scripts, but obviously I would suggest reading a whole lot of other scripts and getting a sense of that. Again, just try to stay true to your voice, because it is easy if you read one particular author or one particular screenwriter, you could fall in the trap of, subconsciously you're writing like them. And I think, again, they're good reference points, but you just have to, again, find your own voice and find your own rhythm and pattern, stay true to that.
Do you remember the first script that you read?
It was probably in the late 90s. And I want to say it may have been Chinatown. It's been a while. So, yeah, it may have been Chinatown, or even Saving Private Ryan, which was an amazing script. And Chinatown was obviously Robert Towne, just one of the masters as well. But I think it may have very well been Chinatown.
Where did you get it in 1998?
It would have been through NYU. They had a library that you could go and take scripts out and read, and so that's probably where I got it. And having been a fan of that film growing up and being a kid, when I was a kid, my mom and dad, again, were very liberated. They let us get away with watching, what now I think parents, maybe over protect, but again, the 80s were a different time. But, my mom and dad, exposed us to, many of the great movies. Like I first watched French Connection, which is my favorite film. of all time, bar none. When I was, I think, 9, it was running on the local Fox affiliate in New York, and my dad had loved that movie, and he said, "This is a great film," and we watched it, commercials and all. And it's funny because I think that summer, it may have been the summer of '87 or '86, it was on like probably every other week. It was, I mean, this is the '80s, and it was a summer film. They just kept running over time, over the course of the summer, or that period of time. But it was, I really loved it. And not long after that, we saw The Godfather, and so I think I had probably seen Chinatown and The Godfather, both Godfather films, in Chinatown or in French Connection before I was 10. So I was exposed to film, from a really young age. That was so. So that was, and your question about Chinatown was, I probably got that script at the NYU library.
How did you learn story structure?
I learned it initially learned it at NYU. I had a screenwriting professor by the name of Steven Siegel, who really, he was tough, but fair. And he was a stickler for not just story structure, but format. And to this day, I still have his voice in my head a little bit when I'm writing. I became maybe at times too wedded to certain formatting, but he really taught me the bare bones of how to write a script. I think, when I was young, again, it was that urge just to start writing, not to really think about the story and plot it out. I think it became much clearer to me about how to, again, story structure, character development as I got older and got out of film school. But he definitely planted the seeds that I then sort of sowed later on as I, again, evolved as a writer.
When you left film school, I know you said that you realized at some point that New York was probably not for you at the time.
Right.
Did you think that you would get a job working in a production company? What was in your mind as a career at that point?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it was to just be in the business and see where, the day, to see where I could go. I was pretty fortunate because when I came out here, I had a lot of interviews right away. My first job out of NYU had been at Writers and Artists, which was purchased by Paradigm, probably maybe even 20 years at this point. But they were still they had a New York and an LA office, and they had a nice stable of James Gandolfini at the time was rep by them. They had some other fairly big name actors. And the New York agents repped I think they actually may have had half the cast on Sopranos. So they repped a lot of, Broadway and film and TV actors. So that was my first job out of school. When I moved to LA, I initially was interviewing at management companies and other agencies. I knew I didn't want to be an agent, but I thought just getting the experience and learning the business was most important. I worked at ICM for about a second, and it was literally a second. It was probably 3 days. I worked for a very big talent agent there and quickly realized that I was just not going to cut it. So my roommate at the time, I remember walking out of ICM and just breathing a sigh of relief because I feel like a monkey had been off my back. So I'm like, okay, I know there's no way I'm going to work in the agency business at all or as a manager, that I just can't do it. I'm not cut from that cloth. There's a certain type and I am not he or she. So my roommate at the time, for whatever reason, he had been sent a job opportunity as a writer's PA on this Fox show at the time. And I went in and I interviewed, I got the job. And then my first day there, the show was canceled.
Oh no.
So I lasted a couple more weeks and the same production company was producing this comedy, and it was a sitcom that they were developing. It was an Ed Burns pilot, and I remember because it was the same company, they were saving on supplies, so we brought the supplies from. I was at Sony at the time. I moved the supplies to the CBS Radford, and I walked in. I said, "Hey, you guys are starting. Do you need a PA, a writer's PA?" They're like, "Actually, we need a PA." And I was like, "Great, here's my resume." And I got the job, and I worked for about a month, and I was a night PA. And I have to say, like, I've worked some very interesting jobs, but driving in LA at night was just this, I don't want to use the word mystical, but it was definitely an interesting experience, because at that time, this was just, people had email, but a lot of executives and other writers wanted the actual script delivered. So I was going from Pasadena to, as far out as I may have gone to Malibu. And this was like, I think I worked like 27 hours straight, but it was wild. It was fun. Like I learned the lay of the land doing that at night. I was kind of on my own. I was, driving probably 80, 90 miles an hour in my little Chevy Cavalier all around the town. But it was an experience, and it was a lot of fun, and I learned a lot. And anyway, long story short, that pilot was being shot, and I had a friend who was working at Law and Order at the time, and he said, there's a writer's production assistant job open on this new Law and Order show. It was Criminal Intent, and they said, are you interested in? I'm like, yes, I would love to, because I think this pilot is ending, and they're shooting the pilot. It hadn't been picked up at that point. I was like, yes, if it's permanent, I love it, and I wound up getting that job. And I was worked on the Law and Order shows for close to 2 years. So, I had that background in television, and then from there I got into to research, and I wound up working at Fox for many years as a research analyst while I was still writing. And it was my day job, but I always was able to find jobs that supported my writing, and I was able to, one fed the other. And it was definitely back to your question about, the business and getting into it. It was definitely, I always knew I wanted to write, but keeping an open mind on the day job type led me in a lot of different directions. And, and I had a time where I did temp in marketing, I temped in post-production, I worked in post-production, I had an array of different jobs, and, while I was still writing, and, always putting in the time, and that's now has definitely paid off. But, anyone who's coming out and trying to get in the film business, I would say, sign up with a temp agency, work in an agency or management company. You may like it. Maybe writing's not for you, and you may decide you are cut from that cloth to be an agent. But it's I think it's just a matter of keeping as open mind as possible, and learning all different aspects of the business while you're continuing to hone your craft.
Did the driving PA job, did that inspire any stories for scripts?
No, no, it was just, again, I was pretty new to LA, so I was still like, I think I was just focused on learning the terrain at the time. And I do remember I was working on a script that early in my career, one of the mistakes I made was, working scripts over and over and over again till it's like, look, enough. You've written this, written 20 different drafts. It's all coming out the same. Maybe you just need to put this in the drawer and step away and go for something else. Beating your head against the wall isn't, I don't, obviously is not productive. And I know that, if you have a really great idea and you love it and you're really wedded to it, that's great. But sometimes the best thing you can do for a script that you're wedded to and you really want to tell, but it's not working, is just to take a step back and, put it away and start and work on something else. I know, again, early in my career, I should have done that with a few scripts where I'm like, I'm just focusing, I'm beating my head against the wall. And that was about working harder, not smarter at the time. And in hindsight, those scripts, the best thing those scripts could have used was better structure, better better plotting, and a better outline. And I hadn't really fully evolved to that place where I was able to really put, to write an effective outline and really explore the story that way. I think I was just so quick to jump right into the screenplay, and it leaves yourself open to a lot of problems.
Do you believe characters drive plot?
Yes.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, or is it the other way around? Sounds like you're very,
yes,
for sure.
It's imperative. They obviously go hand in hand, but if you don't have, again, that intriguing character that we're going to root for and we care about, then it just is going to fall apart for you in your story. That's just, again, my opinion. It's interesting because I feel like there have been, some movies and shows made recently, and they go for this, anti-hero. And, again, if done, we were talking earlier, one of my favorite shows of all time is Californication. And, you have this anti-hero who is, he's a rogue. He's this charming rogue, and he is so self-destructive, and he just, gets in his own way all the time. But he's got heart, and he loves his daughter, and he's in love with his estranged girlfriend. And he, as infuriating as he can be, he still keeps us watching because, again, we do want to see what he's going to do next because he's capable of anything. But that we really do care about him, not just because he's hilarious, he's funny, and he's wizard with words. He's a writer in the series, but he's just, there's something just that we care about him at the end of it all through those 7 seasons. And I feel like, at times lately I've watched some shows, and again, it's just my opinions, that I feel like I'm not, really on the side of I'm not really rooting for anyone. And I know the audience wants people to root for. So if you don't have that character developed in a way that you're going to really have, and again, not all stories the character needs an arc. Things do happen to them, but I feel like at the end of it all, we do want to see something happen to our character, him or her, that changes them. And that we really, even if they start at the place where they're, a loathsome character, by the end, we want to see them redeemed in some way. I think that's just our natural inclination, as humans. I think we do love a good, in a way, not, a redemption story, but seeing a character or characters redeemed. So yeah, I feel like the most important thing you can do is, again, as I referenced earlier, having those beats. Those beats are for your character. What are the changes to your character? Yes, it obviously goes hand in hand with the plot. But how is your character being changed by this story, and how are they subsequently changing the story? I think every beat really does hinge on their decisions and what they're choosing to do in the story, without a doubt.
You said earlier you really like to have the pacing
Yeah.
good and to really push the story along.
Yeah.
Has it ever happened where someone's looked at your script and said, you know what, the character's changing too soon, slow it down, or vice versa?
Sure. Yeah, there's definitely that over the years where I've probably gotten that note. It has happened. I don't recall on which particular script, but it has happened for sure. And I think it's easy, especially in early drafts, when you write an earlier draft and you're wanting to get it down, you've plotted it, you have it set, you have the story set, you have your turns. They're hard turns. People have looked at it, they're like, this is a really good outline, time to go write. Where it sometimes doesn't always translate to, the character may start developing a little too soon. I think if that's the case, then you kind of have to go back to the outline and just, that's why having good structure is important, is going back to the outline and using it as a reference, saying, oh, okay, here's where I need that character to change, and et cetera. So yeah, I do think it's it's one of those things where there are a lot of times that, again, earlier drafts where you may be having a character evolve too soon rather than giving them her a letting it gestate a little bit more.
Zach, what if the outline fails you? What if you outline and then you get to the screenplay and then it doesn't work?
Great question. I think that it's sort of, one of those things where I'll say this. It's important. I've been part of many writers groups over the years, and I've recently been part of another one for the last couple of years. I feel like if you have a good, if you have a writers group in place that can really help you see certain things, fellow writers, I should say, that sometimes can really help. And can steer and I always feel like those sessions that I have with them provide invaluable feedback. I don't always use all of it, but sometimes I've walked away with like, that's a great idea. More to the point about whether an outline fails and the script doesn't work. I fortunately have, especially in my later scripts, have always really worked the outline so that I feel like it's pretty solid. But I would say that, again, going back to what I referenced earlier, if you feel that you've done the outline, you've done the due diligence on that, and you've done the script and it's not working, I would say go back and re-examine. I think you have to ask yourself, why is this failing? Like, where is it landing flat? Why is it not? Because there's a lot of different, areas where you could be coming up short, I'm sure, but I think it's fair to ask yourself, okay, where is this coming up short? You may not have to throw it all out, but going back to the outline and seeing, okay, maybe re-examining the outline and then taking it and reworking the script again based on that new outline. Or again, it just may be one of those things where the story just isn't materializing and you, again, just maybe need to put that away for now and move on to another idea, another story. But again, my advice would be really, again, with the outline, to really work it well, to have your key beats down, and to get feedback. I think it's really important to also get feedback from other writers, and people will give you a fair hearing. I don't think you should. Why I don't think you should be going to your mom to get her, because your mom or your dad or Aunt Sue and Uncle Johnny are gonna love it no matter what. They're there to champion you and root you on. I also don't think it's great to go to somebody who you may know is who's especially or unduly harsh. I feel like you want people who can be fair and with their constructive criticism and say, okay, this is good, but this doesn't work. I think I knew a few people in college, and again, we were just starting out, who would just rip his or her fellow students apart. I was like, what is wrong with you? So I think you have to encourage that. You always have to give encouragement, but I think you could do it in a fair and critical way, but I don't think you have to rip the person apart personally. So I think it's finding that good balance and finding a good group of people whom you trust, who will give you fair and critical feedback. And, from there, I think, then it's about determining the direction you want to go in. Do you go back and rework it? Or do you just say, you know what, I'm going to shelve this for now and move on? And I've known plenty of people who have done both. And again, look, I've started outlines and I've gotten them out to people and I haven't written a word. And this happened in the last few years. I wrote a number of outlines and I gave them to people who I was, I value their opinion. And they said, you know what? This character just isn't likable, or this plot just isn't, this just isn't working. Mostly had to do with the character. these characters are just highly unlikable, and I don't see you really, making it, making this as a film that anyone's, really going to get, have any empathy for anyone that this was one script in mind that comes to mind. And another outline where it was just like, yeah, but it just, certain elements just seem to be too much of a stretch. So I know for me, it's like if that outline isn't working and I'm getting feedback and it's not coming in, and there are people who I trust who are really giving me, I feel they're a fair assessment. And I was like, okay, well, I think maybe it's just better I move on, and maybe later on I'll come back to this, but this just doesn't seem to be hitting the notes that I wanted to.
You talked earlier about Blake Schneider's Save the Cat.
Yeah.
And you take a lot from his outlining advice?
Yeah, he had, and I said earlier 16 beats, it's 15 beats. He has the 15 beats in his story. And, they pretty much follow an order and take you through the story. But they definitely are, I think, a great guide and goalposts to telling, your story and doing it in an effective way. They really hit on, again, and it goes back to, I've said it a few times, working smarter, not harder. Being able to, once you have a clear log line and you're, okay, this is the story I want to tell, it's concise, and it's just, it's 30 to 40 words. Then you want to start breaking it apart. And I feel like, it starts with a character, and from there you basically fill in that character's journey. The first part, I know it's always great, is he has opening image. And the opening image is, what's the first thing we see? What's the first thing we remember? And I think that's such a great exercise. It's like, how do you want to open the story? What do you want the first thing people see about your character, and what kind of impact is it going to have on them? And it goes all the way through, talking about theme, what's the inciting incident, the first act turn, the midpoint. I will say that I feel like, and he did mention this in his book, is that the midpoint is really the backbone of the story. As he said, I believe it's what you hang everything on, because the midpoint basically is that center point of the story, and it does the reversal really of where that story is going to turn and go off in. A lot of that, the reversal of for the character, really, it's such an imperative beat in the character's journey, our hero's journey. And then it goes through, the third act turn, what's the climax, and then finally, what's the last image we see? And if you think about it and you really apply that, and you, again, reference any number of script, but reference the movies, you really get a good sense of, seeing, again, we talked about Saving Private Ryan. The film version, you see the elderly man at the beginning, and then at the end, and they like to have those bookends. A lot of writers like to have the bookends. I sometimes have bookends, and it's, I think it's great to tie up one and then the other. I know one film that I loved most recently, that I've seen in years, or one of the films I loved most recently, was 1917, and it began and ended the same way, and it was, obviously just a breathtaking journey that we went on. And but yeah, they, again, identifying those beats and having your character adhere to it. And it doesn't have to be so rigid. I mean, again, they're guideposts and they're goalposts, and everyone's is different. But I know for me that when I do set out, it helps me really determine where my character needs to go in the story.
Do you believe anyone can learn to write a screenplay that will sell?
Well, there are a ton of factors that go into that. A lot of your viewers have probably heard over the years that, you don't write what is fashionable at the moment, because then after you finish writing a script, you could spend 6 months, a year on it. The market's already moved on. Um, so I think, again, it goes back to, you can write a script about anything, and the most important thing is that your readers and you care about the character or characters you're writing about. Because if you're just writing it to the market, you're just writing it to make, for a big spec sale, which really don't happen that much anymore. They've kind of gone away. The marketplace has completely changed. It's one of those things where I think you, again, have to write the story that you feel compelled to. And again, if you're not caring about your characters, you, the writer, are not, your readers and your audience are not. It's a tricky question. I think anyone can write a script that sells. Those factors, and then you have to have somebody, a producer, an actor, who are going to really believe in it. The business has changed so much that now it seems, especially if you're not going the studio route, you have to get attachments. You have to have actors, attached, or a director, and then the actor comes in, and then you'll attract financing for it, and financing at all various levels. There have been many terrific screenwriters in recent years I've heard about who have written tremendous spec scripts, terrific specs that haven't sold. Again, because the business has changed so much. What you're seeing, you can just, anyone can go and see what's at the cinema or what's not at the cinema right now, but what had been pre-COVID, it's sequels, prequels, comic books, adaptations. There's really not a whole lot of original material, maybe some horror and comedy films that are getting through. But there just really isn't, there's a dearth of, creative material that's not happening. And I would just say that, you have to write what is true to you. I also would say that, don't write about yourself. That old adage, don't write about yourself. Just try to write a compelling story. Tell a story, not your story. Which I think, and again, I've known many writers starting out who wanted to tell their life story, and with all respect, unless you're, you've got some really incredible, rich, just messed up, and there are many who do, but, stick to writing about what you know, not about yourself per se, I think. And you just never know who's going to be interested. Anything can happen. You may, you still may send it into an agency or for looking for representation, and they love it and they go out with it. You could send it to a producer. You could have that actor friend who knows this well-known actor, established actress, and they get it in their hands and they love it and they want to do it. I have a friend right now who called up an old connection who's a well-known TV actor, and he loved her script and he wants to do it. He's in. But then it's a matter of getting other actors attached and getting actors who are going to they're going to bring in and be of value, especially if you're going to pre-sell the script in the States, overseas, wherever. So there's so many factors that go into it now. But I think then it does always boil down to the fact of, and comes back to, writing a compelling script, but you're just never gonna know where it's going to take you or how people are going to react.
Let's take that same student who came to you and said, Zach, I want to know how to write a script that's going to sell. How would you talk to them about working the craft of writing? How would you guide them?
I would speak to them about the, asking them again, what is it? What's the idea? What's the pitch? How are you going to sell this to me? Because again, screenwriting is selling. You're not only representing the product that you're writing, but you're representing yourself in a lot of ways, especially when you get out there and you start pitching or you go on meetings. The craft, again, I would suggest that they do read books like, I mean, go to read Sid Field, read Blake Snyder's books, read William Goldman's books. Just try to get every screenwriting book you can, and then read scripts. Read 10, 20 scripts before you actually sit down to start writing. Just getting a sense of how to go about it, and how, again, read 10 Oscar-winning screenplays. Read Tarantino, read Alan Ball, read Brian Helgeland, Robert Towne, Francis Ford Coppola. I would say just read like all great scripts. Herman Mankiewicz, I think it's Herman, right? Who wrote Citizen Kane. I know there were a few Mankiewiczes. I think it was Herman. He had that new David Fincher movies out about him. But build, get those, again, it goes back to reference. Use those as your reference. Then I think I would say, look, you have an idea. What's your idea? And what's your log line? And what is that? What is it about that log line that's fresh? What is it about that log line that's, captivating? What's the twist? What's the irony in that log line? And then from there, just sort of repeating what I said earlier about then taking it the next steps, plotting, exploring your character, wanting to know where they begin and where they end. That's important. What is that? Where does your character start? Is he loathed? Is he loved? By the end, is he loved or is he loathed? Boiling it down, what's his journey? What is he? Where are you taking us? What do you want to say with it? What's your theme? Most important. That's a huge part. Is what are you trying to say with this? With your writing thematically? Is it about the evils of is it the evils of war? Maybe not the best. There are a lot. Is it about a guy choosing between love and money?
How far will you go for a corporation?
Absolutely, absolutely. Where's or again, a woman, how far will she go for her children? Just watch The Undoing on HBO with Nicole Kidman, and not to give anything away, but that definitely touches on that theme, and not the person that you love not being really who they they claim to be, or they are, you thought they were, unraveling the mystery behind someone. So I think that is something when you set out to write, it's like, what are you trying to say? I had a friend of a friend boiled it down to this: when you're writing a story, what's the story about? Logline. What's it also about? What's it really about? And those are definitely, I think, when you set out, like, those are questions that if you answer them, and those are the ones that take time, but I think once you answer them and you're truthful about what it is, and this is where you see it going, again, it's like answering these tough questions early on opens up the story for you. And but that's what I'm talking again about, working smarter, not harder. You can answer, again, those 15 beats and these additional questions early on. It's going to make your plotting process and your writing far easier and more enjoyable. And you won't be banging your head against the wall or worse.
I like that. So, what's it about? What's it also about?
What's it really about?
What's it really about? Wow.
Yeah. And that is, I remember hearing that probably about 15 years ago. And it definitely helped me as a young writer. It definitely opened it up, oh, okay. It's, I think it's what it's basically saying is, once you have the log line, that's great. But what is it you're trying to say? But dude, what are you really trying to do with this? And I think that's something that people should be asked. And sometimes, I think oftentimes people don't know. They can't answer it. And it's like, all right, well, that's okay. But you better well know it before you sit down and you you take on the task of writing a 90, 100, 110 page script and devoting your emotion and your time and taking away, time from other things, to really devote to this. Because it is your baby, it is your child. You want to know your child inside out, right? Do the work. Do the smart work.
I used to work at a company that had that banner up above accounting.
I know.
And it said work. And I would sometimes transpose, maybe that was my own work harder, not smarter. Oh, no, wait, no, that's wrong, and I would like switch it.
Yeah, it is.
But,
it's true. It's, and again, I for me, it's something that came with age and becoming, again, maturity, for sure. And I think initially we're impatient, and look, I'm still impatient, but with certain things, I become much more patient in letting a process play out. It's not always easy, but in the end, it definitely lends itself to more, I think, more success and more productivity.
If someone came to you and said, I want to learn how to write a script that will sell,
yes,
what would you tell them?
Well, I would tell them, ask them what their logline is. And then I would really tell them to focus on, where they plan on taking that character. Again, it's tough for me, everyone has their own tastes and everyone, sees things in their own way. It's funny, like I've put, back in the day, I submitted scripts to contests and they do wonderfully in one contest and, make it to the finals or semifinals. And then I'd submit that same script to another contest or to a producer and they'd be like, you'd never hear from them or it wouldn't go anywhere. It is so dependent on the taste of the person you're sending it to. I don't think there's any formula. I would say what does help and is helping nowadays is if writers have source material, IP, intellectual property, they have the rights to a comic book, a newspaper article, as we were talking about, a novella, a podcast. Podcasts are being made. If you own the IP, so many studios now and production companies, et cetera, are basing so much of, as we talked about, basing so much of the material on stuff that, on intellectual property that's already been written or produced or spoken about in the case of audio, in the case of podcasts. So that is one way to go because then I think, if you've got a really compelling story and, you own the rights to it, that definitely can get a lot of people's attention. You can say, well, I want to write the script. I don't know how most people, again, I guess it varies from producer to studio head to whatnot, but that is definitely a way to help break in. Again, if it's a story, if it's something really compelling or multiple people are after it and you happen to own the rights, that's a nice negotiating, bargaining chip that you have, and a good way to negotiate yourself in as a writer. So yeah, that's one way to go. I don't, again, there's no surefire way to come up. I think, again, if you have if you're just writing it as a spec, if you've got a great log line and you have an intriguing path forward for your character and you send it to a few people who are like, yeah, you're really onto something here, then, by all means, see it through. But as we know, there are no guarantees in the business, unfortunately.
Or should the question to the person be, first off, before you want to write one that sells, to ask why you want to write? I mean, it's not like you're selling timeshares and, hey, show me how to do it, and what's the hot market. I mean,
right, and it goes back to what you write, what you think, are, I guess you want to write. Right now, the Western has come back, and let's just say, and it's a hot market. I mean, for a while there, it was after Gravity, right? They were doing all these, everyone wanted the studios and producers of all varieties wanted a great space film. It's like, okay, so I'm sure there were a lot of people who saw Gravity, got inspired by it, or becoming writers, and were like, yeah, I'm going to write that next great space film. And it very well may have been a great space film, but guess what? The market's moved on. And it's like, again, I think you have to you can't write for the market. In a way, you have to kind of let the market come to you. And that means writing a story that it goes back to writing a story with compelling characters who you actually give a poop about and want to see, want them, and you have others who are invested in them or in their journey. It's that's what I would say. And you ask a question like, well, why are you writing? What's the point? Are you in this to make a buck? Or are you in this do you actually really enjoy the craft and the process and all that? And you really have to. I'm sure there's some writers who've just set out to write a script and they've done it and they've made money and all that. But I think for the majority of us, we really have to be inspired by the type of story we want to invest 6 months a year. If you're writing a novel, 2, 3, 4, 5 years into.
Sure. So Drive did well, but if then you're trying to copy that
Yeah,
style or
yeah, you always have to be, and I think you always kind of have to be reinventing, yourself. I don't say reinventing yourself as a writer, but in a way, yes, because you always have to come at it, I think, from a different angle, an original angle. Look, again, coming back to the space story, the market may move on, but maybe if you have a unique twist on, that space story, or on a werewolf story or whatever, I think it's always having that, always looking at, in a way, you can have, how do I say it? You can have the same approach to crafting it, but you have to have a fresh take on, constantly have a fresh take on different stories and how you want to, not necessarily you want to tell them, but, fresh takes and twists on your material and what you're trying to say. And, I referenced 1917. It was like, not only was that technically well done, in my opinion, I just thought that from a sheer filmmaking standpoint, but more importantly, from a character standpoint. I mean, we were with this guy trying to get, and it's really not a complicated story. He's trying to get to, get across France to this guy to tell him that these men are going to die and it's life or death, and his friend dies along the way. And man, we are invested, these two young guys in the middle of this brutal war. Oh my God, similarly Saving Private Ryan. I mean, you don't have to be a lover of war films to just be like, I was on the edge of my seat, and it was just, and Sam Mendes is just such a wonderful director, but wow. And again, not an overly complicated story, but just being invested entirely in the characters. And then, getting there in the end. And it's like he saves the men, and he has to then he's got to deliver this news to the lieutenant whose brother he was with who died. Oh man, I mean, I had tears streaming down my eye, my cheeks. You talk about a film that just worked. Oh, that stew just worked brilliantly.
I like that. That's good.
Oh man, it was wonderful.
A stew, yeah, that's good.
Stew, a creative stew.
Yeah, that's good.
But for me personally, I hadn't experienced that in a film in a while, and I guess I used to more, but I think it shows where sort of where movie making has gone, studio filmmaking has gone to an extent.
What's the best part of the writing process for you?
That is a profoundly good question. I think when you find that synergy between your characters and the plot, and again, things are starting to roll, and it could be in the outline phase too. I've had plenty of experiences with, having that breakthrough where you're like, oh, right. this is where I need to go. It's not. I don't think it's necessarily one thing. It could be, you write a terrific scene or a great chapter, and you're just like, yeah. And then of course, you could always go back the next day and think, what the hell did I write? But that doesn't happen as much, I think, when you feel like you really pulled out and you really expressed yourself in a way that, or had the characters express themselves in a way that, resonates with you. I think it can be it can be anything, again, from really thinking up a cool plot point to really getting that log line down where you're like, oh, this is, I'm on with this. And I'm one of those people who's, I know William Broyles Jr., who is a terrific screenwriter. He's one of the best. I remember reading an interview with him years ago saying, never be satisfied. And I agree. I'm not always satisfied. I always want to, I always think I can do things better. I'm a perfectionist. I always want to continue to mine. And if somebody says to me, we can do that, I'm like, great. Let's do it. Let's mine this. Let's dig. So for me, I think when, the time where I really feel, where I love, the process that I love is, I think it's the discovery of, again, your character, where they're going. And it could be, the character is in trouble, and how do we get him or her out of it? What's a creative way of doing it? And always thinking, again, I hate the expression outside the box, but thinking outside the box, coming up with a new way and a new twist, and how that, being inventive. And when that works and it's working on the page, and you think it's working on the page, and you're like, oh, that's cool. And it opens up, and it's those psychological breakthroughs, in a sense, in regard to the creative process.
So when you start to see that, wow, that these dots are connecting, this is actually working.
It's great.
It's great.
It really is. It's it gives you a, confidence, and you just feel it, it buoys your spirit a little bit. Like I said, the next day you could go back and you're like, oh, okay, I got through this now. That's why it's good to have an outline. But even in having the outline and knowing, how do you start up, especially in, writing that next scene or writing that next chapter, you're still staring at a blank page. You have an idea of where you want to go, but then it's a matter of, really inventing that. And it's that's something else that's exhilarating, but also daunting at the same time, without a doubt.
What's the fastest you've ever written a full screenplay, and did that screenplay get made?
Fastest. I wrote Take Back pretty quickly. The first draft was probably a couple of weeks after I'd outlined it. It was pretty quick. It took a little while to get made. And it went subsequently through a number of drafts. But yeah, I probably wrote it in about 3 weeks. 3 to 4 weeks, maybe. No, not even 4 weeks. I think it was like 3 weeks.
3 weeks, huh?
Yeah. I had it pretty much locked in. But again, that was a first draft. And that's the other thing. It's, writing is rewriting, is rewriting. So, what I always enjoy, actually, and I should, back this up, is that putting the script down, putting that primer down is fun. But I really enjoy going back into it and reworking it and reworking it and reworking it. Because I think if you've laid down a good blueprint and you have a good bare bones, what you basically transfer from the outline to that script, I think then, going back and reworking it and making and polishing it and really exploring it even more, that's when the real work is done. And that, I think, is what's most rewarding for me personally, is the rewriting process, for sure.
Have you ever fallen in love with a character? Not one that you'd written, but another one where you felt that the person was real. We were talking about earlier about Salinger and the letters and this book that I read, and these people related so much to Holden Caulfield, and they just...
Right.
they felt he was so real.
Sure.
Did you ever feel that for a character? Whether a book,
I don't
TV
say
show?
falling in love, but I've had some characters that I've been really taken by. Santiago in The Old Man and the Sea. Nelson DeMille, who's a contemporary mystery detective novels. He's sold very well. He wrote The General's Daughter and a few other that have been made into movies. He has a character, Plum Island, John Corey's character, who I adore. I think and DeMille's always like, he's written some John Corey's wonderfully entertaining and funny and witty and acerbic and empathetic, and I love that character. Off the top of my head, I really recently, I'm like a lot of other people, read Where the Crawdads Sing, and the young little girl who grew up, and just sheer empathy for her and her story. Again, I didn't fall in love, but just loved what happened and where she went, where the writer took her, and just being so involved and rooting for her so fiercely. I could say that about Jay Gatsby. He's so mysterious, and I was always fascinated more by Jay Gatsby. I loved Catcher in the Rye, but there was always something, just that allure about Jay Gatsby. Yeah, and again, my memory's coming up short, but yeah, I don't know if I've been invested heavily. I don't know that I've ever completely fell in love with a character, but heavily invested in rooting for, yeah, and adoring characters for sure. And I know I gave you novels. I didn't give you necessarily screenplays, but I think one of the reasons that I am still, French Connection is one of my favorite films, is the dynamic between Gene Hackman and Roy Scheider, Popeye Doyle and Sonny. I forgot his last name. It was Cloudy, was the nickname. Popeye and Cloudy. Obviously was their buddy dynamic. But also it was, again, these were New Yorkers like myself, and they had that attitude, and they really, I just always took a shine to them. I thought they were terrific, and really loved them, and loved their dynamic and the movie in general.
Did you like Serpico?
Yeah, another great one. Yeah. Pacino, again.
New York, yeah.
Yeah, New York, and his intensity in that, for sure, and in a lot of his films.
How do you write an emotional scene?
I have a 17-year-old, and we had that's an interesting story in itself that I won't get too into, but she's, her mom and I didn't go about, having her the traditional way. She was a wonderful surprise. And I think after, especially as she got older, we've always been very close. We still are. And she's my heartbeat. And I think as a father, it definitely feeds into, again, it's like, as a writer, your stories are your babies, your children. And you feel for them, you care for them, and you really, and I think there was something about becoming a dad, especially at a young age, which I was 26 when I became a dad, that really helps you understand and empathize with characters and tell a story that's compelling. I always am able to, I feel like, take a step back and really delve into that, and we've all dealt with loss. I mean, I lost my father at a fairly young age, older than a lot of people, but still pretty young. And he, he was a seminal figure in my life. And I feel like again, like the relationship that I had with him and with my daughter, and, again, having experienced great loss, great love, it definitely, I think, having those relationships helps on a lot of levels, especially when you're writing an emotional scene, whatever it may be. It was definitely with Take Back, the fear of something like that happening to my daughter, and it drove it. At the time, she was, when I first started writing it, she was 8 and almost 9. And, I read about girls as young as her age throughout the world, even in the United States, of being taken or being sold off. And especially as she got older and we got further along in the development of the script and then it became made, it was definitely like, oh my God, this could happen to her. And so there was definitely some fear that drove it, for sure. And, I know, and it's like, it's also sort of like, how do you come back from that? How do you rebuild your life? Those were definitely questions that I, experienced throughout. And as a father, it definitely had a huge impact. And I think we can always relate back to our personal experiences and pull from that. I think you have to. And not everyone, unfortunately, and unfortunately, a lot of writers didn't have that type of, tragedy or anything that happened to them. And I certainly, my dad didn't die in a terribly tragic way, but you still feel the same emotion if you lose somebody you're close to. And if you can infuse that in your writing and use that, you definitely, again, it goes back to us really caring and giving a crap about your characters and your story.
Do you miss your characters when you're done writing?
Yeah, sometimes. I think that's a great question. I think if you get really invested in that story, there's something about it too, because I've gone back to rewrite scripts for people over the years that I had written and they wanted to see a draft, or they've been in development for a while and I'll put them aside and go do something else because, that draft is where it is at the moment. But I always look forward to going back and reworking it. It's always good to see old friends again. Seeing, I've certainly gone back and like, ugh, I'll cringe. What did I write? What did I do? But yeah, no, there's definitely something when you're done with a script and you're, you put it aside or you're done in that moment. You've kind of got to let it go. It gets easier as you write more and you can breathe. And I've never been one of those people who's so wrapped up in his world and the characters, and that worked for some. And I don't want to, but I've been able to. And I know that sounds bad. I didn't. Some people live and they're in their characters' worlds, and that's wonderful. I didn't mean to, dilute that experience for them or anything. But for me, it's like I'm invested when I'm writing, and then I am at the end of the day able to pull myself away. Of course, I think about story and where when I'm not there, but I think once I'm done and if you've spent a long time on them and you're done, you do miss it a little bit. You miss that story a little bit. But then again, you always have in the back of your head, well, I may need to go back in to, again, make it better, refine it. So I'll be back, I'll see you in a little while, take some time, have a beer and a cigarette, and I'll get you down the line, and so yeah.
Zach, you've been generous to send us your script for Take Back.
My pleasure.
So we'd love to do a page 1 analysis.
Sure.
So for page 1 of Take Back, can you talk about the world you were trying to create?
Yeah, absolutely. This was basically, again, we go back to that opening image and really wanting to get a grasp of what this film was about right off the bat. Essentially hitting the audience in the head so they know what kind of film this is going to be. And we're in a dark, we're in a van. We're not sure where. We're not sure with who. But we can get, we can guess pretty quickly that it's a young woman and she's in a bag and she's tied up, and we're not sure what the heck is happening. Doors are thrown open, and she's hauled out by a bunch of seedy-looking guys, and we hear voices, and we can pretty much grasp that she's been taken, she's been kidnapped, and she's going to be used to make these guys money somehow. And we can only guess our worst nightmare, or her worst nightmare, is really what happens. And that sort of sets up the story. And that was essentially going back to what is that opening image, and how is that going to set up the story? What does it mean for genre? What does it mean for character? What is it that we see right away, and how are we going to get everyone invested right off the bat?
How many characters are introduced in this page 1 scene?
Well, again, and I don't want to give too much away. I won't give too much away. We do meet Mickey Rourke's character. This will be him who comes through, and we do meet well, I'll just leave it at that. I will say it's three characters who we meet right from the get-go, from that opening page.
So you introduce one of the characters as a vacant-looking man rather than the character name.
Right. And that actually, I can say that winds up being Mickey Rourke's, Mickey Rourke's character, whose name is Patrick, winds up being his doomed brother. I personally like to reveal as little up front as possible. Making it, keeping as much mystery involved, and keeping that reader turning the page, which are obviously tied together, is so in my process is so imperative. Giving out just little bits and pieces here and there. Again, I know for some writers this seems like it's par for the course. That's the way it should be, but it's not always the easiest thing, because you don't want to reveal too much information. You want it to to slowly come in drips, and keep it going. And it's not always easy to do. It's not always easy to do, but in this instance, yes, I wanted to just leave. When I say vacant-looking man, he'll be coming back later as a vacant-looking man, but then eventually we understand who he is and where he's identified in the story.
So as you said earlier, moving the story forward, but again with drips, you just want to hint at things.
Absolutely, keeping the pacing going. I never, and again, this is just me. I am very fastidious about it. It's like scenes should be about 2 pages when you're writing. Each scene should be 2 pages. So if you're writing, they always say 60 scenes, if you will, times 2, 120 pages. Obviously, the length of films have come down. So I always try to think about maybe 40 scenes and conflict within those 40, those 40 scenes. I should say earlier, within the Blake Snyder thing, there are the 15 beats that he then expands to 40 beats within a story. So for me, and I think you can be anywhere between 30 and 40. But you figure those 40 beats are usually between, 2 and 3 pages, roughly, is what you're aiming for. So yeah, and again, I apologize for not expanding upon that earlier, but just initially getting a sense of the main beats for the character, then expanding those, and that takes you through the rest of the story for the most part. For me, keeping scenes between 2 to 3 pages and keeping action lines, never clumping them, really keeping it sparse, letting the story flow, letting the script. And screenwriting is very different than prose writing. Screenwriting is it's punchier. You don't want to write a lot of superfluous description. You want to keep it short, you want to keep it compact, you want to get to the point right away. And that also ties into the pacing of your story. At least it does for me, and that's part of the flow. So again, keeping it keeping it tight, keeping it punchy, lots of white page, and just letting it flow, a fluid script. You don't want to get too clumped up, and you want to keep the pages turning.
So action line, van rolls to a stop. Next line, side door is thrown open.
Right.
Blinding light floods in. Yeah. So
Right.
just, and there is like a rhythm. I'm seeing a
Exactly.
rhythm.
There's always a rhythm.
Shadow shrouded faces appear. Rough, uncompromising hands grab, pull, and drag us out. I can see it. I can feel like I'm there. Right.
Yeah. And you want, and again, this is not, it's, you may have to go through 7, 8, 9 drafts before you get that rhythm down. That's why rewriting is so important. First draft, you get it down, great, good for you. But there's going to be a lot more, there's going to be subsequent drafts where you're really trying to find that pacing, finding that rhythm, finding that flow to it. That's all part of the process. And it's certainly for me, and that's what took me. Again, I wrote many drafts for this script until I really got to that point where I'm like, okay, it flowed. It flowed.
How many drafts?
Over the years, easily 25, 30. It was a lot. In all various stages, not complete page one rewrites, but definitely different versions, rewriting different scenes.
Can you tell us about the smash cut?
It's funny because I usually don't like putting in, I try to avoid stage directions as much as possible or cuts, cut twos. I'm very limited with those. If I'm doing it, it's there to have a profound effect on, your match. It's almost like a match cut from, your character in one scene's punching, and the next scene, that character's punching, or another character's punching. So it's sort of like that smash cut. It's a quick cut to sort of match, to gel the two scenes together in a very fast way. Normally, I don't like putting in, stage directions or, those inserts.
Can you tell us about the smash cut, though? Literally, it seems like, was it a happy accident or deliberate? It was on the bottom of the page?
Yeah, that very well may have, I think it was, that was the end of the scene. And I think it was probably more of a happy accident than anything else. But it was great because it ended on that first page. So hopefully they're reading to the second page when they see that.
How long did it take you to write this first page?
Well, it was rewritten, but something like that, again, I mean, I don't have a time frame for that, but there are times where I've been able to write a page like that within a couple of minutes. Other times it takes longer because, again, I'm refining it and I'm finding my way. But it can vary a whole lot of different, length of time for that particular process.
And when you said you did roughly 25 rewrites, I realize they weren't all page one rewrites, but what part in particular did you work most at that needed the most polish?
Mostly her journey, changing it for, because funny enough, Mickey Rourke's character was a woman.
Really? Oh.
But we got Mickey, and I was like, they said, can you make this a man? I said, sure, why not? And, it's Mickey Rourke, why not?
Sure.
That definitely changed that dynamic a little bit. But I think it had more to do with her journey and her character. And then at other times, making the plot, making it fresher, updating it, I would say, at certain points, some of the action. I think for the most part, it's Zara now, but in the script it's Sarah, the Zara character, or Sarah, sorry. I did change her along the way, and there was definitely certain changes, but she always was kind of like, again, I stuck, it was this woman who committed this act of heroism, was trying to escape her past, had the spotlight turned back on her, and, all the bugs came out under the light to make her life a living hell, and she had to fight back and take her life back. So that was kind of always there. That was pretty much always there. But there were always tweaks that I made to, again, her story and her background, and just to make it more compelling. And her more compelling.
Is this first page still the opening of the movie?
I don't know. I don't think it is.
Okay. Judging from the trailer too, I'm not sure.
I don't think it is.
Okay, yeah, well, I don't want to say anything.
Sadly.
Okay, jeopardize it.
Because I really like that opening. But again, can't be wedded to our work.
Yeah.
You get paid, and it's like...
Looking back at it now with the first page of Take Back, were there any mistakes? Anything you feel like you could have done better, or are you happy with exactly how it flows?
I do like the flow. I'm never going to say I'm satisfied, but I'm happy with where it's at the moment. Somebody came around and said, hey, we could do this. I'd be like, great. I like that idea. Let's do it. I'm amenable to it. I think filmmaking is so much about collaboration and hearing other people out. Kind of like life, which we've kind of eschewed lately. I feel that you should always be willing to hear what people have to say. Even if you don't like the idea, hear them out. Don't dismiss it outright. If it's the most inane effing idea, okay. But somebody may just as an aside say, yeah, but you might think about, giving her, a little charm bracelet that you can bring back later or something like that. As a simple, bad example, but think about it. That's a really good idea. Work that in. Or some way symbolize that symbol term ties back to the theme. So where it's at now, I think it accomplishes what it needs to. I think it sets up the film with some mystery. We get a sense of danger. We get a sense of establishing what genre it is. We get a nice opening image. So yeah, but and I will backtrack. That getting to that opening image, the actual writing of it didn't take long, but I think working around some scenes that had been there prior and making it, that took some reshifting and some rewriting. The actual scene itself to write didn't take too long, but there was definitely parts of drafts that were different, that had different opening images. And I think for me, it was about streamlining it and making it as concise and simple and quick as possible. Again, that's how I work. I want to know, delving into it as quickly as possible and getting to the story, and getting to our characters and getting to those main beats as fast and concisely as possible is so important.
Did you cut down a lot of dialogue and of the action lines in this first page?
It's not too much. There was some. Yeah, probably maybe, in that instance, maybe a quarter, a half a page. Yeah. Because there didn't really need to be much that needed to be said. That was in my intention. And again, I think you do more by showing more and saying less.
Take Back, coming out in 2021?
2021, I don't quote me, it should be coming out in between April and June. We're hoping I'd just say the spring, at some point in the spring, maybe okay. Mid to late spring.
Right, and it was shot during COVID?
It was shot during COVID.
Okay.
It was one of the few movies made during COVID. It was shot in LA and out in the Palm Springs area, yes.
Right, and it stars?
Stars Mickey Rourke, Michael Jai White, Gillian White, James Russo, and a handful of other actors and actresses who you've definitely seen in a theater near you or on television. So yeah, it was a really good cast. Really, they did a terrific job with the casting, without a doubt.
And I know it took a little bit to get made, and we're
yeah, it was. It was definitely a process. We had I had met through, I had sent the script to a producer friend of mine, and he had gotten it to Christian Sesma, who's the director, and Mike Hatton, who's the producer. Both have worked extensively in the business. Mike is an actor. He was in The Green Book and a number of other films. Christian's worked on a number. Christian actually has just had a film come out early this year with Val Kilmer called Pater. And he's directed a number of other films. And yeah, so we went to them, and they signed on pretty quickly. And then we were able to get Mickey Rourke attached. And we unfortunately had an investor drop out, and we needed to fill that. So we went to a financier, fairly big financier in town, who stepped in, and we unfortunately weren't able to get it done with him. So we signed on, and then it just didn't happen. And then the rights reverted back to me. And after that, we were able to find a financier pretty quickly, plug the budget shortfall that we had from the initial investor backing out, and we got it made, and it'll be out soon.
Excellent. Okay, and we'll have a trailer, of course, in the link below.
Yeah, absolutely. That is the official trailer.
Now we're going to go to page 2, and we see our protagonist, and she's sparring, and she's throwing a punch. Why did you decide this was the best way to introduce the protagonist?
Sure. Well, I wanted to have a part of the pun and impact on how we see her right away. The next scene is of her as an attorney. She's a small town attorney. I wanted to set up the fact that she had a bond. Her husband is the one she's sparring with in the scene. We don't know till the end of the scene that it's him. We think she's just, doing a sparring session with someone, but it's her husband who's taught her all this. She's proficient, she's athletic, and she's an accomplished lawyer in this small town. For me, those were the priorities to set her up, as well as the relationship with her husband. And we did it without a lot of dialogue, more of the action. I also wanted to establish there's martial arts involved in the story. And again, this is going to be a thriller with action elements. So for me, and I think as a writer, putting as much of that in there without saying much, I think is really important. I had mentioned earlier, I think sometimes people, especially young writers, start out and they become just enamored of dialogue. And the less you can say to move your story forward, the better. Dialogue should be there to service the story, to move the plot forward, to move your character forward, not just to, I think people just will throw in extraneous dialogue just because they love the sound of it, and it does nothing for the story, except slow the pacing, as we've been alluding to. And for me, in those scenes, it was like just get to the point without saying a whole lot and expressing it in images, because movies are images. And I once, a professor of mine actually at NYU said, if you can watch a whole film with the sound off and at the end understand, then that movie's been successful. If you don't have to listen to what they're saying and you can just follow the images, that's pretty darn good. If you can say it without, Tarantino film might be difficult to watch that way, but at the same time, you'd be surprised. Even though he is such a master dialogue writer and he's so terrific with that, he can still put together a heck of a story.
On pages 8 through 11, we have our next piece of action, which serves as the inciting incident, I believe. Okay.
Yes.
Can you talk about the moment in the screenplay, whether it was structured or not?
Yeah, that was definitely structured, because that's where she goes in and has that, becomes the hero and exposes herself. So that was definitely always going to be the inciting incident, for sure.
Is it okay to talk about what happens here?
Yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely.
It's not too many spoilers. Okay.
Not at all.
So it shows too that her strength training and martial arts and the boxing and all that
Absolutely.
it's a major piece in this.
It comes in handy, yes, big time. And she commits that act of heroism that then exposes her to the national media, and she becomes a story.
Right, and then you see that her phone, she starts being texted by, family, journalists, all these different things.
Exactly.
And what seems like sort of an exciting, good thing is quickly about to turn.
Yes, exactly. Again, she's exposed to the wrong people, as it were. Yeah.
Seems like there's a lot more dialogue in this section.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It was basically she's trying to talk this guy down and say, look, speaking to the checkout counter girl, but and then ultimately him wanting that pin that was so important to her, and that her husband had given her, which is symbolic, which is a symbol throughout the rest of the film. That definitely drove most of the dialogue there, and became the source of conflict for her taking the guy down because he wanted that pin, and she wasn't going to give it up, and she was able to take him out. I think if she had just said, I don't want any trouble, just walk, she would have let him walk. But because he decided to instigate, she had the wherewithal and the training to do that and put him out in a very heroic way. So yeah.
And the pin, sorry, that's not a MacGuffin, is it?
No.
It's okay. So I was thinking of a MacGuffin, it would be some type of a symbol, or, so correct me, how would that be? What would that be called, that pin, because it interplays into the rest of it?
I would just say it's symbolic of, the relationship and the dynamic that she's created with her husband. Because its symbol is an Asian symbol for best friend.
Oh, okay.
And he gave it to her, and it's emblematic of their relationship. And it comes to play as the story goes on that she still has it. And in the end, when, again, not to give too much away, but when you do have that, she does have that final battle, and again, this is in the script, that it's something that she has to, gain strength from, in the knowledge that, again, she's wearing this on her heart, and it's, again, emblematic of her husband's support and her life, her new life, and how the old one is coming back, and that contrast, and she has to be strong and stay strong and hold on to the new life and not let the old, obviously nightmarish one come back for her.
And not only that, but this stranger who has held up the liquor store, the convenience store, he wants that.
Yes.
And that's
He wants to take it from her.
a symbol too of, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Yes.
So in many ways, it's symbolic of this is her new life, and then an evil force is trying to come and take it. And
Absolutely.
interesting.
And
Okay.
it plays throughout. It plays throughout. And again, it was, it's definitely one of those things where, there are a lot of people that force feed symbols in sometimes in movies, but I think it can definitely be done in a way that's subtle and still have greater meaning and to the rest of the story throughout, and carry it throughout.
Are there
thematically.
Okay. And are there overt symbols and then covert symbols? Like I think they said with like the
Yeah.
artist, they showed like a descending stairs when it was
Sure.
the economy was bad.
Sure.
And that some viewers, I mean, I actually wasn't totally aware of that. I was
Yeah, I
watched
think
it.
some of those are choices by the director. I think sometimes in a script we do, we will put stuff in, a symbol in of some kind. We hope to make, something tangible. But oftentimes I think the choices that directors make, or, on their set when they're making the movie, it becomes, they kind of come up with their own, they find a way to play it up, whatever it may be. Sometimes it's in the script, but other times, yeah, I think the way it's shot and, the way the set's designed, it as we said in film school, the mise en scène sort of lends itself to creating those opportunities for symbolism in a film.
How many drafts of the script did you do before you had other people start reading it?
At that point, maybe a dozen. I was rewriting it a bit. Because sometimes I would come back to it, somebody would be interested. Well, I shouldn't say. Initially, my manager got it out to people. So, I mean, I would say maybe not that many when the first person read it, whatever it was, 7-8 years ago. So, yeah, and maybe, I shouldn't say that. Maybe it was 3 or 4 drafts. I went back and rewrote it a couple of times before I actually started sending it out. for sure. And again, it was a different time. There weren't, the studios, I think, were still putting those movies out, and there were still producers who were willing to put up and financiers who were willing to put up their own money, and they didn't necessarily need stars attached. They would, work with you, develop it with you. And I think became more prevalent in recent years where they started attaching actors and directors and trying to pre-sell the film, especially in the independent world, before they would commit to going into production.
What were the first notes you were given on the screenplay?
My manager, early on, I think. I don't recall what they were. I think he liked my first couple, because I probably wrote a draft and rewrote it and then got it to him. Overall, I think it was pretty positive. This was sort of what he had in mind. But I don't remember exactly what the detail. I'd have to go back and look for that email. I'm sure I saved it. But yeah, it was my manager, who's a wonderful guy, still is. He's became one of my dear friends. He was great because he always saw big picture. He was never a micro note giver. He was more of a macro note giver. And sometimes he'd give me feedback and I would be like, what's he saying? And then it would hit me later that day or the next day. I'm like, oh, okay. Because it would be vague, but I'd think about it and then it wouldn't be vague anymore. He had that gift. And I've always been, when I've given my friends, I'm a macro note giver. I try to be as concise as possible, as positive as possible. I don't like to burden people with too many notes. I find I have big picture thoughts. Try to go for maybe 2 or 3. Again, sometimes they're good. They might be very positive notes, like keep doing this. Sometimes, okay, you have to pick up the pacing here. But I don't get into the minutia of note giving. I'm pretty broad speaking, and it depends. Some people prefer that, other people don't. I know sometimes for me, I would like people to be more specific because it would help. But everyone has their own way of giving notes. So I just roll with it as best as I can, and try to be as helpful and inspiring as I can with my notes to people, and encouraging, I should say, not inspiring, but encouraging.
Can you give me an example of micro notes?
Yeah, micro note giving is bad example. Why is his name Bob and not Jim? Bad example. I just feel like very much in the minutia. Maybe starting to sort of, at times it's helpful, but rewrite dialogue in a way that I don't think is really maybe the prime problem in that script, where it's like, okay, we have a script. We don't care about the main character at this point. It's page 10. They're being overly descriptive. They have a voiceover that's basically explaining everything that's going on. And it's slow and the pacing is off. But we're talking about this one stretch of dialogue, or, again, maybe not the best example, but it's stuff like that where I feel like, I am always like, okay, what do I really like about this script? Always start off with that, but then say, okay, but I feel like, you have and I'll focus on certain parts of the script, like, Act 3 doesn't have a hard enough turn. Where is he or she at the end of the story or at the end of the second act, when they have that cathartic moment that then's going to turn them into the third act? Like, really, what is that? Why they started out here at the beginning of the script, they're now at their lowest ebb. They're in the dark night of their soul, and what is going to bring them out of that? They're at their lowest point. What is it that's going to turn them? That's made it all up into this point that's going to make them make that turn, that hard turn into the third act in order to finish their story and win in the end. It's stuff like that, which I think and I think a lot of people focus on, but I think sometimes, macro notes where we start getting again into the real minutia. Sometimes people like that. Sometimes it helps, but unless you're, unless you've been paid to write and you're getting, 1,000 notes from the studio executive or producer with every little, line iteming every part of it. It's I don't know how helpful it is, but that's just me.
How do you protect your script before sending it out?
WGA, register it. Copywriting isn't the worst idea either, but I think most WGA, get it registered to the WGA. It's like $20. You can do it online. It takes like 5 minutes, if that. And you're covered. I think it covers you for up to 5 years. Renew it after that. That's and copywriting to a degree, but I think in the business, as long as you have a WGA, I know there have been a lot of instances of people having their work stolen, et cetera, and it's I should say a lot, but there are instances of it. I think people are more I don't know. Again, I've heard of it happening, but I think it happens less than maybe people think, that stealing material. You guys may have heard of more so, but I've always known that, there are some instances, like I know the Coming to America script was like a big deal that somebody claimed that Eddie Murphy stole that, stole their idea, and it was a whole lawsuit. Dodgeball, I believe, was another one. Again, I would say to cover yourself and your story, WGA. WGA West or East, they have registration. You go in there and that definitely covers you up to, it gives you a little, or gives you a lot of comfort knowing that you're there, that you have your script registered.
Not mailing it to yourself. Poor man's copyright.
That's a good question. I mean, potentially, but you could do that. But I would also say, and I think also with, having electronic documentation, if you do send it out, can't hurt. Correspondent, I don't know if people write many letters anymore, but having physical correspondence. But I think the WGA is definitely the easiest and the smartest way to go.
Are you careful with who you share your ideas with?
Mm-hmm. I am. Family members ask, I will tell them. Friends who I've known for a while. Sometimes I'll be out and we'll, whenever I'm among people who, especially I'm in the writers group I share, and I've shared it with some other folks. I don't get too, and I'm gonna knock wood here. I don't get too worried about it. Again, because I know that I have my script registered and all that, and I have a good lawyer.
Right.
I have a really good lawyer, so they can try, but he's a savage, so, and he's pretty well known, so he can try. I don't think it would be a good idea.
In general, what are the best ways to have an uncredited writer find script buyers?
Well, I know that the contests have always been a way to get your work out there. I think there are a handful of contests like the Nichols Fellowship, or Nickel Fellowship. A few other contests that are there. I think any writer starting off should go, you can Google it, Best Screenwriting Contest, and see for yourself. That's one way to do it. I mean, the fees, it's usually anywhere between, early entry fees are anywhere between $40 and $60. I don't think they've fluctuated much in the last 15, 20 years. That's one way to go. I will say with the contests, you got to win. I think if you win, it opens doors. I think even if you make it in the finals, I placed in a lot of contests in semifinals, quarterfinals, finalist even.
In Nickel, right?
I was a semifinalist in Nickel years back with the Pirate Hunter script, believe it or not, which was a shock. I just sort of submitted it for poops and giggles and went in, and it made it all the way to semifinals. That was actually a script that I had co-written with an old friend of mine, and I was amazed because I know the Nickel always seemed to focus more on, drama, maybe some comedy, some thriller, but this was a straight action movie. So I was impressed that it got as far as it did. And it got me my first manager, who is still my dear friend. So it definitely opened some doors. It got me some meetings. But I feel like you still need to come away with the top prize in that, maybe a runner-up. There's also, for writers, Inktip, which is a website that is devoted to, you put your you can upload your logline, synopsis, you can put a treatment and a script, and/or I think it's treatment and/or a script up there. And that definitely, there are a lot of production companies who are on there. I think they have something like 15,000 members, and that you can subscribe. They send your logline out, and you'll have people come and they can contact you. I used to have some stuff listed on there. I had somebody contact me. Never really materialized, but there are people that are looking. That's one way to reach other folks. Other than that, I know it's time of COVID. Networking is definitely a good way to go. It really is all about who you know. That's a great way, and working in an agency, working in a production company. Those are definitely ways of you can get your work to somebody potentially within those agencies, companies, et cetera, that might be able to open some doors for you. Working on shows, working on a TV show, working on a film, and continuing to work on various productions. Again, you accrue a lot of people. They know it's what happened with me when I started off, going from one to the next and sort of broadening your scope of contacts. It's a funny story. I remember, this is before I even thought about being a TV writer. I had just left Law & Order, the Law & Order show after 2 years, and I had given my script to a writer there. And she got in touch with me a couple months later. She said, I read your script. It's really good. She said, have you considered TV writing? And at the time, TV writing, I just want to write movies. And foolishly, and this is something that I say to anyone watching, if you have one of the top TV writers on Law & Order, or one of the TV writers in the business, and again, this was before the advent of TV was starting to come to the fore, and you were starting to get into the golden age. But this was probably a few years before that. And I was just so focused on being a film writer. But this woman said to me, and I'd given her the script because I admired and respected her immensely and her talent. And she was one of the top writers there. I said, she called me. She said, this is really good, and have you considered writing TV? And I said, I haven't. And she said, well, I would. And I didn't really heed that call until later. And I did write some pilots, and I actually did get some meetings with folks in TV and at some of the networks with some of the pilots I had written. But I wish I had heeded that call earlier. And some of your viewers are probably looking at this and saying, what a schmuck. And you viewers are right, what a schmuck. If you have that opportunity, you hear those voices, it's all signs. Read the signposts. If somebody says, hey, you know what, you may want to consider writing this or working on that, or, take it. Because there are not a lot of opportunities in the film business. And if you're there to heed the call, it could lead to some really potentially wonderful things.
That's a great story. Yeah, I mean, maybe it just wasn't right for you at that time. I wouldn't.
I was young and dumb and etc. That's all I'll say.
I had certain things that, if I think back, but
yeah, she was a. I mean, for her, because I was gone from the show at that time. I was long gone. She did not have to call me she did not have to call me up. And, when I left, I said to her, like I told her, I said, I really appreciated, you really were inspiring to work for. You were always really cool and I admired who you are. So I don't know if that did it, but she did get back to me. She didn't have to, and she did. And she was just very complimentary. And I just wish in hindsight, maybe I had, but like you said, I was in a different place then. I think I was 25,
Yeah.
so, and you're thick at that. And that's why I'm saying there takes some maturation.
Also, so many things are being presented to you at that age. And so I think there's
Sure.
this weird skew that you think it's always going to be
Yes.
that way, especially in this
Great point.
town.
You do.
And
You do.
you just think, no, I won't,
I'll get that next opportunity in 3 months, right? Or,
Yeah.
something else, right? And you look, the one thing I'll say is that nobody ever said to me, and I'll still knock wood, nobody ever said to me, stop writing. You just don't do it. You need to find a new career path. Nobody ever said that to me. And I mean, I guess we wouldn't really say that to anybody, but if somebody's really being blunt, sometimes they would. Like, you just don't have it, And I'm not saying I have it. I'm just saying that in my professional experience, nobody ever said, just stop. This isn't for you.
Sure. And sometimes if someone says it, it doesn't even mean it's that somebody's trying to sabotage someone. So you just never know what
it's their
it is.
opinion.
Right.
Absolutely.
What their
Absolutely.
agenda is.
And a real funny story. So that script that went to the semifinals in Nickel, 3 months earlier, we had somebody submitted to this film production company, which is no longer around, and they made a couple of comedies that weren't very good. But their director of development, it is the meanest response I ever received. And it was my writing partner and I at the time we received it. This development exec said, it's not such and such material. It's not this company's material. And I remember thinking, and you made that film, and I was so, when we went, and I'll tell you, I admire my restraint, because after we made it all the way to the semifinals, it was like, I still had a little bit of acid in my mouth about that. And I just want to write, oh, really? Well, it's Nickel material. But I didn't do that. I'm not like that. But I was like, wow. That was definitely, just, I don't know if she meant, this isn't for us, but to just, to go out of their way and say, this doesn't rise to our level. I was like, wow, okay.
Yeah.
You just wanted to put us down. All right. Well, they're non-existent anymore. So we all got the last laugh because somebody went to see their movies, I guess. But it was a really mean-spirited thing to say, I thought. I would never, ever say anything like that to anybody. It's a very conceited thing.
Yeah, I almost feel like it's a hazing, and that's the only way I can think of it. It's like you've got to have a bunch of those to just keep you.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to keep getting, because
Absolutely.
it's they do happen.
They do.
What do you think it was about Take Back that excited producers and financiers?
Well, it definitely helped to have Mickey attached. I also think that in the marketplace now, I think thrillers like that, thriller horror films that have a decent hook to them, that can, maybe you get a good attachment cast-wise, and that can be made fairly cheap, will definitely help your cause. You want to write something, and obviously minimal locations. I mean, I always think of Saw, which is just brilliant because it actually was a short film, which they then expanded into a feature. But it was really obviously took place mostly in one location. Take Back had multiple locations, but it's a smaller indie action film that, was able to be confined to the small town. So I think that definitely helped it. But, a film that's got like I would say a budget of between $500,000 and maybe $1.5 million, $2 million. Not a lot of locations and still, is you got a solid 85, 90 page script to work from. And again, there's not a huge lot of location changes, and not a huge cast. I think people are, and again, you get a good attachment, could be anyone, who will bring money into these foreign territories and pre-sell the film, you're going to be in good shape. Easier said than done, yes, but definitely it's not impossible. And I will say real quick, I think based on what we were talking, you made an excellent point before when we were talking off camera about you have these sort of the huge studio budget films that are like 300 million, and then you have these smaller budgets like Take Back, etc., that are going, anywhere between $500,000 to low seven figures. There's really not a lot in between that's happening, unless maybe you're at Netflix or Amazon. But the studios are generally, they're trying to hit it out of the park every time with these huge budgets, and the smaller films are, being made in the way Take Back is, with foreign financiers. It's not all foreign financiers. There was a mix, but definitely different, conglomeration of different producers and financiers and production companies. And then, but the in between, the 30, 40, 50, $60 million films, they're not really being made as much unless, again, there's a major actor attached and they are doing it maybe independently of the studio. But, I'm sure they exist, but it's like we talked about before, it seems like there is this big gap between what's the reality and of what's happening now with as far as movies being made.
How did you get Mickey Rourke attached so early?
That was all Mike Hatton, the producer. He had I believe he knew Mickey's agent or manager and was able to get it to him that way, I believe. Or he had a connection somehow and was able to get Mickey the script. And Mickey signed on pretty quickly. They signed on very quickly. James Russo had already been attached. So, and James and Mickey, I believe, knew each other too. That may have helped a little bit, but I think, Mickey was the big get, and that was again done through Mike's a mutual acquaintance of Mike Hatton's.
Why didn't Mickey Rourke leave the project?
Because we paid him a lot of money.
Well, I know that the project was sort of in flux.
It was.
For a while? Okay.
We had him there. And he, to his credit, he stayed. He was staying part. He wanted to be involved. His character is also takes care of. He runs an animal no-kill dog shelter in the film. That's his character. What his character does. And Mickey, as we know, is a big. He's, I think, a PETA spokesperson. So, it had a lot of elements that I think he appreciated, and that kept him there for a bit. And the fact that we paid him a lot of effing money to be in it, that definitely helped.
What kind of conversations did you have with Mickey Rourke about the script and his character?
I didn't have any conversations with him. The script, so this was an interesting one because there was no, I was paid, but it wasn't as a spec, and it was not a work for hire. I was paid as a portion of the budget. So basically, once I turned in my pre-production draft, the director, Christian, and the actors kind of took it from there. I really didn't have a lot of, didn't have any involvement in the pre-production planning or, discussion. my role was fulfilled I fulfilled my role as a writer, and that was how it went. So they made changes to the script, and again, it was their script to make changes to, because I had been compensated, and I think it'll turn out well, with what they come up with. I'm optimistic. But it was, but I met Gillian and Michael Jai White on set. I had met James Russo a few years earlier, when we were sort of getting in we were in the infant stages of getting the film up and going. But I unfortunately did not meet Mickey or speak to him. He had more direct conversation with Christian, the director, and Mike, the producer.
How did you get the producer, Mike Hatton, on board?
So the gentleman who was the lead producer initially, he was in the market for finding a director. He found Christian. Christian worked with Mike Hatton, and they were producing partners. Mike was still acting. He was, at that point, he was in Green Book, and he's still in a bunch of films prior and after Green Book. But Mike, Mike and Christian really took to the material, and because Mike was Christian's producing partner, they came and were both involved in the process from then on. And Mike, I can't say enough good things about him. Mike, his energy, his support, and again, enthusiasm, and Chris's too. But Mike's like the Energizer Bunny. He's go, go, go. And I can appreciate that about him. He's a hustler. And you need somebody like that, I think, especially navigating in the indie world, even in a studio film world, to have a guy like that on your side who's hustling, who's trying to get things done, and doing 300 things at once, and getting them done well, efficiently. I hope to make more films with Mike down the line. I really do. But we'll see. He's working on 3 things at once. Literally, they just finished 2 more films since Take Back, and with really good casts. So he's always got something going on, as does Chris.
Where were you emotionally, and what happened when you heard that the film may or may not happen?
It was definitely, over the years, it was a roller coaster. I've had some other experiences like that where films were, on the verge. It was always teetering on that line of will it or won't it for a while. And I think I became so, and again, it really just had to do with the lining up the money. It wasn't that I didn't think that, Mike or Chris was enthusiastic. I just thought it just came down to dollars and cents. And, but I became very just sort of immune to the roller coaster of emotions, and just sort of accepted everything as it was. And just, was optimistic that it eventually would happen. It was just a matter of timing, like everything else.
Is that something that you practiced early on, or you learned to develop?
It comes with age and maturation, and my martial arts training. I'm an impatient person by nature, but I've definitely learned to temper it over the years, and just keep everything in perspective. And there's just so many things that are out of your control. I tell that to my wife all the time. It was like, with any aspect of life. And filmmaking obviously is no different. It requires such a tremendous amount of patience. Look, I have another film now that I've been sitting on for 4 years, which I think is a, very timely concept with everything we're going through. It was timely 4 years ago. But trying to get everybody in sync with everyone's schedule. And I don't blame anyone. Everyone's got their own thing they're doing. But it definitely gets to the point, and I'm still guilty of being like, what in the F are we doing? What's going on here? It can be very just, you really have to learn to, I would say, if it's a year, that's one thing, but when you go on 3-4 years and you're still waiting, it's like, okay, you start to get a little wary about where everything is, and, just hope that, again, your number's called. But again, so many things are out of your control.
And again, that was a teacher at NYU that said, if you stick with it, eventually.
That was my manager.
Your manager,
Yeah,
okay.
If you keep at it, eventually your number comes up. I learned that about my wife. I was single for many years, and I would get frustrated that I was like, I just like to meet a nice girl, and somebody who I really felt that connection with, and it took a long time, but eventually my number got called, and we've been, actually we've been together 4 years as of yesterday, and
Oh, great.
we met 4 years ago yesterday, and then we've been married for close to 2 years.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. But it just, I think it's just, look, some people it happens sooner, other people it happens a little bit later, and I think if you can just stay optimistic and stay focused and keep moving forward and not get discouraged, and it's so hard to get discouraged. It's so hard. But I really believe that if you're truly passionate about it, and at the same time you have that talent and you have multiple great stories to tell, but just takes one, it will eventually get you there. I do believe that. I'm living proof of that. But again, it's not getting discouraged. So many people, actors, writers, directors, everyone comes to Hollywood is meant to discourage you. It's here to discourage you. It's the, development people are paid to say no. They're paid to say no to writers. So, and it's so easy to just get discouraged and turned off by that. And we all dealt with it. But I will say that, if you stick to your guns, you keep honing your craft, you stay encouraged, not discouraged, and you keep marching forward. Sorry for the cliches, but it's true. And you do have a talent for it, even a modicum of talent. If you have it and you keep nurturing it, and again, eventually, I do think it was Aaron Sorkin, I believe, who said, good material eventually finds its way.
Yeah,
I believe it was him.
It sounds like I watched the masterclass with him. It was excellent. I feel like he might have said that as well. And in a sense, not to cheapen dating with the film industry, but there's some similarities in that in LA, the dating world is so much about, how do they look on paper?
Absolutely.
Where'd they go to school? What do they do?
How do they look in person? What's the
what do they look in
facade?
person? Sometimes people don't even care about that. They just want to know,
Superficiality.
what do they do for a living? Yeah.
Absolutely.
And so that equates the same way in the film industry. Who's attached? What is this? And it's like the same.
What have they
I
done?
need something bigger. I need this. I need
Right.
better. But then that one special thing, i.e., or the special person, you can somehow find that. But it takes a long time, I think.
Yeah, it sometimes can. Sometimes it's quick. Sometimes it's, it doesn't take as long. Sometimes it takes longer. And again, I'm not saying, look, I mean, people may read Take Back or watch Take Back eventually and be like, what? But, we've all seen those movies where we're like, what were they thinking? How did this thing get made? I'm guilty of saying that. I am. But I still think that there has to be a couple of things. The script has to be somewhat decent, all right? It has to be legible. It has to have some kind of emotion tied into it. And again, you don't know how it could just affect, and somebody reacts. Luckily, you know, Christian and Mike both really liked the script. They dug it, and they were like, okay, let's get rocking on this. The producer who took it to them was the same way. Like, they took to it. And again, I had a number of people who were lined up who did really like the script and were high on it. So I had that going for me. But sometimes, look, it may, again, bring you back to the French Connection. I think that went to 25 different places before somebody said yes.
Really?
Yeah. I believe, don't quote me, but I believe it went to every studio in town, production companies. It went all around. And there's a handful of other screenplays that went around. You know, it was, and it wasn't like, you know, a bidding war for them. And, you know, you saw what amazing movies came out of that. And again, I'm not saying ours is going to be on that level, but all it takes is one person to say yes. 20 people may say no. 25, in the case of French Connection, 24 said no. And then I believe it was Zanuck. I believe it was
okay. Mm-hmm.
Dick Zanuck said yes when he was running things over there. He was young. He was the wunderkind. And his father, Darryl, had run Fox, and he said yes. It's that's it. And if you're, and I was fortunate that happened. And I hope it happens again.
I believe you said you've been writing scripts ever since you were at NYU.
Yeah.
How many years did you go, even though
20.
20, okay.
I did option a number of scripts along the way. And I was fortunate that some of my scripts served as good samples to get me into meetings with a number of, you know, fairly well-known producers and network execs. But this was the first script that I was able to really close. It took a while.
20 years?
20 years. 20 years. And, you know, I'm grateful that it's here. I'm grateful that I do have the credit. But it did take a while. And, you know, again, I'm one of those, and I'm sure many guys and girls who had a lot of near misses with their scripts. No doubt. No doubt. And I was fortunate that a lot of those people really did like my work that I submitted. It was always like, we really like your script, not this, but what else do you have? And I'd say, well, I have this. And they're like, yeah. And it just didn't always sync up. You know, I did have some really wonderful meetings with some, you know, again, some fairly well-known people, but in the end, it just, this happened finally. It was wonderful.
Well, we always hear about, you know, 20 under 25, and you know, if you look at, was it Stieg Larsson from the trilogy series,
yes.
The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, and all that? I think he was almost 50. I know he's 50 when he passed away, but he'd been working on at least one book. I'm not sure what.
When he died, I think they came out after he died. He never even saw the success.
Right, and he had been a journalist and doing other things, and so it took a very long time, but he was just very dedicated to, he wanted to do it right.
Yeah, there was a gentleman who just, I believe, sold, I think he's in his 40s, and he had something similar happen where he was like just living hand to mouth. He had a family. I believe he's maybe even Irish, and I think he wrote a book that sold for a few $1 million.
Oh, wow.
And there definitely have been, there are, and I certainly don't, you know, I try to stay young so I don't feel my age, but no, it was just definitely, you know, just staying on the path and sticking with it, and you know, again, you know, this isn't like, you know, a major studio film, but it's still, I'm proud of what happened with it. I'm proud that it got made. It's not easy, and especially during the time of COVID. So I definitely take some pride in that. And if it leads to great things, you know, that would be wonderful. But I definitely did feel a sense of accomplishment when, you know, I got that paycheck and, you know, it's, you know, the cameras were rolling. It really felt great. It really felt great. And again, I hope to continue writing, and having other stuff produced. We'll see. It remains to be seen.
At what point in the 20 years did you say, I'm not giving up?
I would say, again, I was repped. I did have a literary manager for a long time, who got my work out there. And I felt like over the years we got close on a few things, and it was obviously like a tease. So I never really felt like, I was ready to give up. I always knew that I just have a burning passion to write. So in my mind, I was like, look, I'm going to keep doing this, and I will get there. I did have some very supportive people, certainly not ass kissers, telling me, just keep going. And it was encouraging. And I think really once I got this script and the other script that I mentioned, that's sort of with attachments, I think once those started coming in the last few years, that was like, okay, it started feeling like, okay, this will eventually happen. We're going to go through, well, we obviously went through some discouraging times and a little bit of the emotional roller coaster, but we were able to, I felt eventually we were going to get there. So I'd say in the last few years. I also started, about 5 years ago, I started writing novels as well. And I do have a book agent. And he's always been very encouraging, and he has one of our books that he's shopping now at a lot of the major publishers. So it's I feel encouraged by that as well. But yeah, I never really. Of course, there are moments like, am I gonna quit? Did I get discouraged? Yes, but I never felt like I was gonna quit.
What did the script sale teach you?
Humility, perseverance. Yeah, it's when I saw the it was actually deposit. Don't tell my account. I got a little misty-eyed, but I think I had been through so much with again, over the years, just again, people liking your work, you thinking you were close to something, but it was, I hate to say anticlimactic. And I got a little misty-eyed, but I was like, okay, this is great. But I think I had been at it so long that I was like, just it was definitely I definitely was humbled. I definitely felt humbled by it. I really did.
Humbled in the sense that you stuck with it because you loved it, or humbled in the sense that your number was called?
Both. Yeah, I did. I felt, again, it was just it was a lot of years. And, it's, the funny thing is the thing that went to me is like, oh, well, maybe this also could be the last time. But I did it. And that was great. That was, what I took from it. I savored it. But I guess I wasn't like I jumped up and down of this, around the house and popped a champagne cork. As much as I had always envisioned that, right, for years, like, I'm gonna go, ape crap here and just, do cartwheels down the street.
Risky business.
Right, exactly. Take my neighbor's Porsche out for a spin. No, it wasn't really like that at all. It was, again, just anticlimactic in a lot of regards. But again, I still left feeling very just humbled by the time and the experience, and and feeling that perseverance, that okay, this is real. I made it here. And if it's the only thing that I ever do, I still have it on. I still have it. I still have a credit. I still have it there, and that was wonderful. And I hope there are more. We'll see.
That was my next question. How confident are you that you will get another movie made?
Well, I feel that the other script that I have is, again, timely. I feel very connected to it. I think that it's got some really terrific elements in it. But it comes down to dollars and cents. And if the money's there, I think we're in good shape. It's also just always gauging people's levels of commitment in these things. And I feel like they are committed. But I think it comes down to attaching people and getting everyone working. I think it's gelling everyone together in order to push it through. That's what I'm hoping. But at this point, it's a matter of getting the investment into it. That $1.5 to $3 million it'll take to get there, and then hopefully it leads to snapping the clap sooner rather than later. But we'll see.
So going back to that question I had said about if you were going to teach someone to write a screenplay that sells, the first question probably would be, well, why do you even want to do it in the first place? Because that same person may not stick with that for the 20 years. But if you love it.
Yeah, if it's a burning passion and it gets you up in the morning and you just enjoy the process and the highs and lows that come with it, then go for it. If it's something where, there's nothing wrong with giving it a try, but if it's something where you're not really, it's like anything else. It's Malcolm Gladwell's a 10,000 hour rule, right? Where you put in your 10,000 hours, I don't say you become an expert, but you become pretty proficient at something. It's just like that. But I think also with that 10,000 hours, you really have to love doing it. It really has to get you going. And you really, it's essentially, it is like your mistress. It's my mistress now. Was my girlfriend for many years. She became my mistress. Writing became my mistress after I got married. And my wife, my wife coexists with her pretty well. But but yeah, it's definitely something you just have to have an unbridled passion for. And you seek to get up every morning and it's there, and it's like going to the gym and working out. It's working your writing muscles every day. Just going to the gym, going to the writing gym.
So the Goldfinch, Donna Tartt, take her 12 years to finish that?
Did it?
Maybe. Is it a sequel to another? She had another one. They were, I think, both turned into films.
I know the name, yeah.
Goldfinch was turned into a film, but maybe.
Yeah.
But yeah, 12 years.
Yeah. That's dedication.
Mm-hmm. And she just loved,
she
loved the process. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, there's, I think William Goldman, he was younger because he was a novelist when he established himself probably in his late 20s, 30-ish but I don't think his first film was made until he was maybe in his mid 30s. So yeah, there's definitely, he's not the best example, but there's definitely, I feel like writers or artists or et cetera out there who are, sometimes it just takes them a little longer to gestate and find the story that they're gonna make their mark with, or at least break through with that piece of work.
Did you write every day for 20 years?
Almost, I would say, close to it. There were times, obviously, some weekends, or when I had my daughter, it wasn't always the easiest thing. But there were times where I'd get up early before she was awake, and especially when she was a baby, or super early and work. Now she sleeps late, so. But no, at this stage, there occasionally I work on the weekends, but generally I confine it to Monday through Friday for the most part.
So that 20 years, you would get up at 5:45.
Not every day, but
Okay.
I would make it. And then, I was working, when I was working, I worked at Fox again as a research analyst for a number of years. I would use, I'd be up early before I'd have to work. And then I usually work during my lunch break. So always try to get in at least maybe like 3 hours, and then I would work sometimes on the weekend, definitely before I was married. But now I feel like, I feel like I'm hitting most of my goals during the week. Again, working smarter, not harder.
There you go. If 5 years from now pass and you still haven't made more money from screenwriting, will you keep writing screenplays?
I think it depends. I've really enjoyed working on novels. It's, the great thing about working novels and having that, again, we talked about the intellectual property earlier, that so many of the films that are being made now are based on IP. And now that I have really two properties that are IP, I feel that, and I do have confidence that one of them will be sold soon. Hopefully both, but one, I think, again, on knock wood, is close. I would love to turn both of those into films, but we'll see. I will always be writing. I'm a senior because I still need to work and pay my bills. I'm a senior copywriter at a company out here in LA. So I am always writing, no matter what, copy, novels, scripts. And they're all very different. Not to be undone, but it's still, for me, the process is copywriting, novels, scripts. You still need to do your research. You still need to have a great headline or a log line, or, and you need to have structure to what you're writing. It really, so much of writing does follow that similar pattern, and that's how I work anyway. So I'm satiated with being able to write every day now, which is wonderful. That said, yeah, I would never, if an opportunity came up to write a great story, or if I found I had time to develop a script that I thought would make a really great film, absolutely. So I would never not do it. I think, though, at this point, the movie business has become, again, it's just changed so drastically, even in the last 5 years. So I feel like, again, a lot of writers are, again, writing books, or back and forth, or writing TV, or are back and forth between novels and TV and film. They're bouncing all around. So, but I think they're picking their opportunities as they come up, rather than just being a screenwriter, straight screenwriter. I think writers are diversifying all the time, which is great. So yeah, I think creativity is creativity. I think if you're writing for a health and wellness brand, or you're working for you're writing a novel about World War II, I think they all sort of feed into each other with the process. And so yeah, I know that's sort of the long answer, but no, I would completely be open to do it. But I also feel like I have a whole array of other creative projects in my portfolio at this point. So if it lends itself to that, then absolutely.
Right. And you're absolutely right. I think you said that either before the interview or during, just that so many adaptations are
appearing.
I mean, with the Hillbilly Elegy, that was
Hillbilly Elegy, right?
J.D. Vance.
The Queen's Gambit was based on a book from, actually, interesting story about that gentleman. It was published in 1983 and he died in 1984.
Oh.
And now it's being made almost 40 years later.
Oh, wow.
So it's definitely, you know, there is, you know, a tremendous push for, again, the adaptation and basing, you know, current material on previous material. Again, whether it's graphic novel, comic novel, like we just discussed, podcast, anything, art, a news article, magazine article. And it's for whatever reason, I feel like the folks who are at a lot of these companies or these production companies who still have sway, they feel that there's an air of legitimacy to putting that forward, and there's not as many original series, you know, or ideas really being put forth like they used to be.
Yeah, and I don't know if it's just because our attention spans are so much shorter. So like novels used to be such a thing, and letter writing and all that, and now, okay, if that's actually a success, then we can turn it into a. I don't know. It's
it's really true. It's really true. It's books are actually the I believe what I read recently, that books are being sold still at a pretty high rate. Their book sales are up, obviously, when the pandemic certainly helped that. And I don't know how many of those are ebooks versus actual hard copies, but they're still reading. People are still reading. And I think that there is so much material out there that they're drawing from. And oftentimes they view certain material, like I said, as a legitimate source. There's already that built-in audience. Even if it's 5,000 people who have read it, it's still it's made by an imprint, you know, one of, you know, HarperCollins' 300 imprints, and it's small. But it still has a really good hook, and it has a built-in fan base to an extent, and then they decide, okay, well, we can make this into a film. I don't know. Wow. I don't know the mindset. I think again, it does have something to do with. They want to obviously, like any other business, they want to maximize their profit, and they see if they already have a built-in fan base that's only going to, you know, increase sales, and it's, you know, it makes sense.
Right. And Barfly, was that with Mickey Rourke? Wasn't that based on?
I may have been.
A Bukowski, okay.
It may have been.
I wasn't sure.
Yes, it was.
Okay.
It was based on a Bukowski. Yes.
Then Bukowski wrote about it in Hollywood, I think, if it's the same
really?
film. Yeah, and he talked about his process. So
yeah. I don't know.
Very colorfully described. But
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he was a character. That one.
And Factotum, I think, as well, about his jobs. The one with Matt Dillon and Lily. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
So, you know, it's been going on for a while. But yeah, there was that built-in audience, and then
absolutely,
there we go.
Absolutely. And you see like Hillbilly Elegy, or I know where the Crawdads Sing is going to be coming out. Okay. That's all got major studios attached to it. But you're talking about, you know, however many hundreds of thousands or millions of copies sold, and people are going to say, hey, you know, I love that book. I'm you know, subscribe, or when we do go back to theaters, you know, they'll go pay to see it.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah. Hope that opportunity is still around.
I hope so too.